When Emilione turned 24, she somehow got warped into another reality. She opened her eyes, looked around, and saw a completely different world around her. Her clothes had changed, her hair turned pink, and even the irises of her eyes were red. Behind her, she saw a crowd of clergymen kneeling before her. The young guy in charge greeted her and called her a blessing from God. It didn't take her long to figure out that she'd become Saint Emilione the moment she landed here. And that was a problem, because even with her acting skills, there's no way to become a saint overnight. She tried her best, and after 6 months of learning from her mistakes, they kinda accepted her as a saint. Because of this, Emilione got the chance to visit the palace. One day, she arrived a bit early, because she wanted to stroll through the garden and spotted 2 people talking. One of them was Duchess Ranella Nestro, and standing next to her was some Marquise's son. They were clearly deep in something interesting, because Ranella looked totally fascinated. She's all sweetness and beauty to everyone. If this was a novel, the Duchess's daughter would be the main character. At first, Emiliona was jealous, because Ranella always had a ton of good-looking guys around her. But now, she's actually glad she didn't fall for one of those dudes hanging around the young Duchess. Everyone adored this girl, and the main hero was head over heels for her. A real saint lost her mind over that guy and ended up turning into the villain. But right now, Emiliona doesn't have time to think about guys, because she's got to study a bunch of stuff. Besides, the way guys acted around her was obviously different from how they acted around Ranella. But our girl wasn't expecting much anyway, since all the attention was focused somewhere else. So this dude just made Ranella an offer, and she promised the duchy would cover all the expenses. But Ital objected, handing her a book and saying he just wanted to give her a gift from the heart. Still, the Duke's daughter insisted that something like this absolutely had to be paid for. Anyway, she was stoked to be meeting the Crown Prince soon, but she didn't want to leave Lord Etwall behind. Watching those two, Emiliona noticed they were definitely flirting. But taking a closer look, she realized it was all an act on the Duke's daughter's part. And she got super curious about what kind of performance Lady Ranella was putting on. Emiliona left that place, and the whole thing kept bugging her pretty much the whole way back. Later, she met up with His Highness, who had asked to see her earlier, and without even saying hi, he coldly told her to sit down, which kinda pissed her off. He's just some stuck-up dude to her, acting all high and mighty just 'cause he's Prince Cassidra Macron Vesseloyal, heir to the throne. And even though he's hot as hell, she almost feels bad he's such a jerk. The prince started talking about some royal hunting competition they're throwing soon. After that, there's a banquet, and Cassidra wants her to be there, 'cause Ranella wants her to. Okay, got it. But Emiliona wanted to hear the real reason straight from the prince's mouth. Recently, His Highness told the sanctuary about the monster population spiking, and the competition's gonna cover a huge area. So, because Ranella's worried about the prince's safety, she wants the saintess close by. The way he talks about the Duke's daughter, you'd almost think he's head over heels for her. Emiliona remembered again that just a minute ago, she was all over some other guy. Her smile's pretty cute, but she's probably got some sneaky stuff planned behind it. The prince just asked the saint to respect Lady Nestro's wishes, even though he knows she doesn't hang out in places like that. The dude even smiled at that moment, which Amelia thought was super weird. Turning him down could have had some nasty repercussions, so she agreed. Then his face went all serious again, and he dismissed the saint, 'cause Ranella was supposed to be showing up soon. Amelia mentally ripped into the Duchess for ditching one dude and immediately running off to another. After leaving the Crown Prince, she saw Helio Restuen, a big-shot thinker from the Empire, in the hallway. They hadn't seen each other in ages, and this was the first time they'd bumped into each other at the palace. Amelia was happy to see him and found out Lady Nestro had called him in for a meeting. Kinda strange, right? The Duke's daughter meeting with him, so something's probably up. Sounds like that was news to Helio, since Ranella only asked for him. The dude's reaction was complicated, and the saint tried to calm him down. She almost felt sorry for the kid, but now, Emiliona knew for sure that the whole sweet lady everyone's in love with act was just a front. She could tell Helio the truth, so he wouldn't get his hopes up for nothing. But the saint was way more interested in watching Ranella fake it than dealing with someone who was actually genuine. Later that evening, Emiliona was beat and decided to lie down, but her mind was still racing. I mean, the hunting competition was coming up, and the young Duchess could be planning something else entirely. As Emiliona closed her eyes, she felt something weird. She was seeing the future, shown to her by the local god. Dinner time was getting close, and the girl decided to get up, but her body refused to move. But what she saw kept bugging her. It was like watching some twisted nightmare play out. Her vision was basically a bad dream. She saw a monster showing up at the competition. Not too long ago, some real messed up stuff went down. Monsters were spotted in Sartoon County. Luckily, they managed to deal with it in time, using commoners as bait, thanks to the knights. That bought them the chance to wipe out the monsters, but the guys used as bait croaked, "But what do you expect from the Count? He's just glad the monsters are gone, and there are fewer poor saps around." Emilian was sick to his stomach, with a world that praises and admires that kind of crap. And on top of that, they pulled this stunt after a prophecy the saint told them. That night, the girl saw a vision for the second time, and it foretold the return of the monsters. These monsters are beasts of chaos, so they're super dangerous to people, but they have one weakness: divine power. That's why the sanctuary's in charge of wiping them out. The problem is, there's not much intel on these freaks. No one knows how many there'll be or what level they are. Regular knights could handle the low-level ones, but only divine power can kill the others. Emiliona considered reporting the monsters to cancel the hunting competition, but then they'd just use lures again. She didn't want to let that happen again, and besides, they probably wouldn't cancel the tournament anyway. She'd have to observe first, and now she was even glad she'd been invited to the event. Just then, High Priest Renabin came back to her, and she asked him to wait a second so she could throw something on. Then she opened the door, and the High Priest, as usual, started the conversation with a greeting to the saint. He'd taken advantage of Emiliona's permission to go on business and managed to get back for dinner. The girl was happy that this guy was so loyal and suggested they head to the dining hall. They walked in silence for a while, but Renabin kept glancing at the saint. Catching him staring, the girl asked what was up. The guy got flustered and said everything was fine, but Emiliona was already hooked and pressed him on where he went during the day. He looked super worried when he asked her permission to step out for a bit, after all. So Renabin confessed that Lady Nestro summoned him, offering him and the Thinker a spot in the contest. The saint didn't think it was a big deal, though she was a little worried seeing the High Priest rush off. He was anxious because Lady Nestro never called him first. Looks like Renella's got the High Priest wrapped around her finger too. This is getting way more interesting for the saint. She was curious to see who'd be the one winner who could snag Lady Nestro's heart. The next day, while Emiliona was holding a small meeting, Renella showed up for a visit. She didn't tell the maid the exact reason, just that she wanted to meet with the saintess. Her showing up was totally out of the blue. She didn't even bother to give us a heads up. Still, Emiliona agreed to meet her, told us to show her to the living room and offer her some tea. After a bit, she went to see the Duke's daughter, who immediately greeted the saintess. Putting on this sad face, she apologized for dropping in unannounced. Then she confessed that she needed to discuss something real important with the saintess, and it wasn't about her own life. So Renabin, who came with Emiliona, was welcome to stay. Ronelle would actually feel calmer with that young master around, since this topic was super heavy for her. The saintess gave her this knowing look, figuring the lady was up to something shady again. Then she agreed to her request and asked her to spill what was bugging her so much. Renabin offered the lady a handkerchief, and she confessed that some seriously messed up stuff had been happening to her lately, bringing her to tears. The reason? Someone's been threatening her life. Just recently, on her way to Lady Sharon's tea party, she found her knights totally wasted. That struck Emilione as pretty damn weird. And Lady Nestra can't figure out what kind of craziness is going on around her. Things are disappearing, and sometimes she wakes up in a different room, but none of the maids have seen anything. Ranella said it so convincingly, it was hard to tell if she was acting or telling the truth. And lately, they've assigned her extra security because her dad's freaking out about all this. They still haven't caught the perp, so Ranella came to the saint to ask for help. At that moment, she looked at Emilione with freaking Shrek cat eyes, and anyone else would have caved immediately. But the saintess sensed something fishy. Still, she decided to play along with this chick, especially since she already knows the prophecy about the monsters, so she can totally handle this. The saintess agreed to watch the Duke's daughter for a couple of days and hunt down the culprit. Ronella's face lit up instantly, adding that she just needed protection. Her father would handle the investigation. And so it was settled. Emiliona would take the case from tomorrow until the tournament starts. With that, their conversation ended, and the saintess asked Renabin to escort Lady Nestro out. The Duke's daughter headed to the exit to meet the High Priest. As she did, Emiliona caught a glimpse of an evil smirk flash across that beauty's face. However, she didn't let on and decided to see what happens next. She was even amused by this little acting game she'd now been dragged into. The next morning, the saint arrived at the duchy, where a clearly thrilled Ranella greeted her immediately. Right behind her came the Duke and Duchess themselves, telling their daughter to keep her excitement in check and watch her manners. Ranella apologized and then properly greeted the saint. Emiliona returned the greeting, but she hadn't expected the girl's parents to come out to meet her. But they couldn't have it any other way, since the saint had come so far for their daughter, and they told her to make herself at home. Ranella, barely able to contain her joy, grabbed the saint's hand and invited her inside. And she promised to take good care of her guest while she was here. Once inside, escorted by Ranella and the maids, Emiliona took a quick look around. There were paintings in expensive frames on the walls, and statues here and there, just as she'd imagined. But something else had really piqued her curiosity now. The Duke's daughter was different. Just yesterday, she was full of despair. The saint admitted she was worried about it. Ranella explained that she felt much calmer today, now that her protector was by her side. Emiliona returned the smile with the same kind of fake sweetness. She knew Ranella was putting on an act, but judging by her parents' reaction, there was definitely something to worry about. Maybe the young Duchess really is in danger, and she probably saw this as an opportunity. The saint still had time, and she was ready to keep watching to find out more. Then she was invited to lunch, and she couldn't stop wondering what this beauty was plotting. At the same time, the saint was a little bored. She wasn't used to seeing Ranella alone, without a gaggle of guys around. Suddenly, the Duke's daughter asked the saint why she was so active. The atmosphere felt pretty nasty, and Emiliona wasn't in any hurry to answer. Ranella, still playing Miss Innocent, explained she was just asking out of curiosity. She pointed out Emiliona was way different from the previous saints, and she wasn't the only one who noticed. Back when our girl first showed up in this world, the saint was treated okay-ish, but the sanctuary itself? That place was a freaking dump. Since the people there were born with divine power, they were all ridiculously nice. So they never got ahead, even when someone was straight up stealing from them. From Emiliona's perspective, life in the sanctuary was somewhere between starving and dirt poor. And unlike the saints before her, she started fixing the dam system in the temple. She'd explained why at meetings before, but now she told Ranella it was to save the sanctuary. But Ranella didn't get why the saint was still acting like this, now that things at the sanctuary were better. She almost thought the saintess was holding something back. Emiliona chuckled lightly, then admitted she'd gotten a little greedy. Still, she was pretty damn sure that if she kept at it, things would get way better soon. As she said this, she kept an eye on the young Duchess's reaction, and she kept on talking, trying to make sure there wouldn't be any more questions like that. Just then, the young Duchess's hand twitched a little, like something wasn't going according to plan. The saintess knew she'd been right all along. The hunting competition was starting soon, and the job of protecting Ranella was coming to an end. In all the time she'd spent with this girl, Emiliona hadn't seen anything that could be a threat to her. She didn't know how the Duke's investigation was going, since they hadn't talked about it, but it looked like it had hit a dead end. Ranella's reaction was kinda weird, so the holy woman decided she couldn't just let it slide. Emiliona decided to send a priest to help with the investigation. Soon, everyone started buzzing because the imperial carriage rolled up, and Prince Cassiodor stepped out. The girls were practically swooning, totally mesmerized by how hot he was. Then Lady Nestro started getting out of the carriage, leaning on the prince's arm that he offered her. The girls who were just drooling over the prince were shocked he showed up with the Duke's daughter. Right after the imperial carriage, another one pulled up, and it looked familiar to Emiliona. A young guy got out, and Lady Nestro immediately locked eyes on him, and she went right over to say hi, stoked that he'd made it to the tournament. His name is Enesis Cajun. He's a duke too, and also Ranella's childhood friend. One look at him, and Emiliona knew he was head over heels for this beauty too. So, including that brainiac standing off to the side. That made 4 guys interested in Lady Nestro. Emiliona figured she'd watch them for a bit, but then Ranella spotted her. The crowd noticed the saintess too, and they were all surprised, wondering why she'd show up in a place like this. Even though Ranella was still drawing attention, Emiliona gave her a polite hello. Just then, Enesis walked up to Lady Nestro and reminded her she was supposed to give him the talisman handkerchief. It's tradition. When a knight goes to war, his sweetheart gives him her handkerchief. It's like a blessing, wishing him a victorious return. Ranella held out a handkerchief with purple embroidery. Enesis loved that color. Then, she started tying the handkerchief on his wrist, like always, and he just stared at her, completely mesmerized. Meanwhile, Emiliona noticed the prince already had a handkerchief tied to his sword. Cassidra walked over to Duke Cassian and reminded him it was time to move out, since preparations were complete. Ranella sweetly smiled and waved after them, wishing them a victorious return. Both young men thanked her and headed towards their horses. To pass the time, the young duchess made small talk with the other ladies, while the saint stood off to the side. Suddenly, she heard someone yelling furiously, urging their horse on as they approached her. The next moment, one of the knights collapsed at her feet. Terrified and breathing heavily, the girl told him to calm down and tell her what happened. Gasping for air, the knight, his voice trembling with anxiety, delivered the dreadful news that the prince had been attacked by monsters, and Emiliona realized her prophecy had come true. Suddenly, the air crackled with tense panic. But the saintess gave them a pointed reminder. They were supposed to avoid casualties. The knight started apologizing for the bad news, but the girl softened her tone, saying it wasn't his fault. They're guessing it's a mid-tier monster, and most of the guys who went there are wounded. Emiliana asked for the exact location so she could send backup. Just then, they saw Lady Nestro bolt towards the forest, and while the winded knight just stared at the running duchess, the saintess also took off, chasing after Ranella, who clearly had her own agenda. It looked like she was trusting the saintess to cover her back, so she was probably counting on something. Racing to the location, Emiliana caught a nasty whiff of blood. Ranella was already glued to the prince, babbling about how the holy woman was on her way, and they'd take care of the monster. Cassidra told the duchess not to worry, and the fact he could even talk meant his injuries weren't life-threatening. Hearing someone approach, the prince thought it was the monster and instinctively hurled a dagger. Pure luck. That dagger ended up stuck in a tree right next to the holy woman's head, just nicking her cheek. The prince started to realize he screwed up, and the duchess was clearly thrown for a loop. The cut on the holy woman's cheek wasn't much, but she definitely felt the pain. Even with the scratch, Ranella started begging her to heal his highness. Getting closer, Emiliona saw his wounds were way worse than she thought. Surprised he was still conscious, she placed her hands on him and began to heal him, but the recovery was painfully slow. So, the monster's poison got into the wound, and it keeps reopening even with holy power being used. All Emiliona can do right now is first aid. We gotta wait for the poison to clear his system. She was telling His Highness to head back, when all of a sudden, a suspicious rustling sound. Next thing you know, this monster with long dangly bits on its snout and a vertical maw pops up behind the cleric. Emiliona's life was in danger, and the prince grabbed his sword to protect her. He told Ranella to step aside, but she told him to get back, because she was about to take on this beast and save his skin. Thing is, the monster was covered in wounds from fighting the knights, and it was moving slower because it was beat. Green goo was oozing from its wounds, the same poisonous blood that poisoned the prince. Emiliona was sure she could handle this monster, and she pulled off her gloves with the painted fingernails. Gloves like that look kinda weird in our world, but maybe that's just how they roll over there. The beast went straight for her, seeing her as just another snack. She started dodging, trying to avoid getting hit by a tentacle or splashed with acid, cause she wouldn't be able to handle that. And if this monster corners her, she's totally screwed. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted wounds on the monster's body that should have been fatal. The monster was also twitching towards the prince and Ranella, and while it was flailing around, it was a chance to strike. Emiliona had only one shot to take this thing down. Focusing divine energy in her hands, she launched it at the monster. And the next thing you know, it roared and its carcass hit the ground, splattering her from head to toe with green blood. Looking at the motionless body, His Highness hoped the monster was dead. Just to be sure, Emiliona kicked the carcass and confirmed that the beast was, in fact, toast. The saint said that monster can smell blood, and they were lucky it didn't latch onto that. Then, she held out a hand covered in green goo to the prince and suggested they get the hell back to camp. Cassidra was a little confused. He was kinda grossed out about touching something that looked like mold. But then Ranella chimed in, offering to help His Highness get up, and the saint realized the prince was too good to touch her after she just saved his ass. Out of nowhere, Cassidra grabbed her hand and hauled himself up. Emilione thought that was a little weird, but decided to save her sarcasm for later. Shouldn't the prince be wiping away Lady Nestro's tears right now? But he just ignored her. That's when the saint remembered there were still people fighting the monster, and she told His Highness they needed to take care of the wounded. Ranella jumped in again, saying the prince needed healing first and foremost. She latched onto him like a leech and glared at the saint like she was just getting in the way. By this world's standards, Nestro was right, but the saint told them to head back to camp where other priests could help. Cassidra wanted to argue, but Ranella started dragging him away, especially since it was a chance for her to be alone with him. And to convince him, the Duchess declared that she'd be miserable if he got sick. She was playing on the fact that he hates seeing her in pain, and only the saint realized it was all an act. But she had bigger fish to fry right now, and she asked those two again to get back to the camp. The prince decided to listen to her request, but he kept looking back at her on the way out. As for Emiliona, she turned away to avoid watching the circus. Plus, she wanted to look around a bit. So, the situation was brought under control because she'd brought a whole bunch of priests. No one died, thank God. Now we just gotta heal the prince. When she got back, she saw Duke Cassian yelling at Ranella for the stunt she pulled. The Duchess looked pissed and screamed back that he had no right to scold her. Emiliona, watching all this, couldn't figure out how things had turned out this way. A little while earlier, Emiliona had gone to the prince and explained that this was all she could do for now. There's still a little poison left in his system, so he'll feel pain, but it'll pass. She can't completely remove all the poison right now. It would take way too much energy. So the saintess did everything she could to at least keep the prince from passing out from the pain. She also advised him to visit the shrine occasionally. It would speed up his recovery a lot. His Highness thought about it for a second, realizing the imperial family would now be indebted to the shrine. So, he actually went along with Emiliona's offer. She was a little surprised, honestly. Then she asked Lady Nestra to look after His Highness. He needs someone watching him at the shrine, and Ranella's perfect for the job. The young Duchess was practically waiting for this, grinning ear to ear as she jumped at the chance. Then she started gushing over the prince, saying he'd be back on his feet in no time under her care, and promised to stick around so he wouldn't get bored. It was obvious Ranella wanted to lock down her position with His Highness, since he's gonna be emperor, but if she marries Cassidra, she can kiss goodbye to the harem she's got going now. While Emiliona was figuring out the young Duchess, a super freaked out Anessis burst into the tent and started yelling at Ranella for what she did, voice all raised. He was just saying she ran off into the woods alone, and he was worried something might have happened to her. She snapped back that she couldn't just sit around when the prince was in such a bad spot. Plus, she was sure the saint would come running after her right away. Emilione didn't really want to get mixed up in all the drama and told everyone to chill, since the prince needed rest. Duke Cassian realized he messed up and immediately apologized to His Highness. But on the other hand, Ranelle shouldn't be blamed, since she rushed to help the future emperor. And the fact that Cassian got so mad just meant he was super worried about the young Duchess. Though, looking at Enesis and Helio right now, you can tell they're jealous of her. The tense vibe was broken by an announcement that His Highness's guard had arrived, and Emilione got ready to head out, leaving Ranelle to watch over the prince. But she begged to come back with the Saintess and thanked us again for saving His Highness. Now the Saintess is stumped, not understanding why this woman doesn't want to be alone with him. She looked at Cassidra, waiting for him to have the final say, and he told Emilione to do as Lady Nestro asked, which really pleased the Duchess. On the road, Ranella kept thanking the Saintess and pretended to worry about the effort she'd spent. She even admitted Enesis was right, and she shouldn't have risked her life and gone into the woods alone. Still, she fully believed the Saintess would appear at the right moment like a miracle, and she did. Emilione was getting annoyed by this, and she explained she was just doing her job, but she wouldn't shut up and promised to give the Saintess anything she wanted as thanks, whenever she asked. The Duchess was playing it perfectly, and if she'd just arrived at the dukedom, she wouldn't have noticed the hostility. But now she realized almost everything that Lady said was a straight-up lie. Ranella started worrying they'd cancel the banquet, but knew celebrating right now would be messed up. On the other hand, she's got a ton on her plate, plus her brother's supposed to get here. Lady Nestro's brother is the heir to the dukedom, and all Emiliona knows is that he's studying overseas. Ranella also promised to invite the saint when her brother gets back after graduating. They're planning a family get-together, which should totally make her forget about the banquet being scrapped. The saint might actually come, since she's free now that the banquet's off. Plus, Duke Enesis is supposed to show up, but she wasn't sure if he would after that awkward tent talk. Although, considering how he feels about the Duchess, he might show up to make amends. After that, Emiliona accepted the invite and said she'd bring her assistant along. He's gonna be a total show-off at dinner, especially since Ranella's been ignoring him all day. Out of nowhere, the young Duchess blurts out that her brother's a freaking mage. But then the carriage just lurches, and the girls realize they've been in an accident. They got a little banged up from the jolt, and while they're trying to get their bearings, some dude walks up to the carriage. The sun's behind him, so you can't see his face when he leans in. Just this flash of silver hair. Then, with one hand, he just rips the mangled door right off. And when he leans in a little more, Emiliona gets a good look at him. She doesn't know this guy, but she's pissed that he dared mess with the sanctuary's carriage. This guy, though, now that he's spotted the saint, is suddenly curious what she's doing out here. The saint gives him this "are you stupid?" look like duh. It's the sanctuary's carriage, but she spells it out for him anyway. Then she demanded he explain who he was and what he was doing there. His face seemed familiar, but she couldn't place where she'd seen him before. Just then, he spotted Ranella, curled up in a ball, hiding behind the saint. But her expression instantly changed, because she recognized this guy as her brother. Both women were stunned. Emiliona could barely believe they were related. They were so different. And Ranella was a little shocked he'd shown up so early, and that they were meeting like this. After all, standing before them was the heir to the Nestro dukedom. He snapped his fingers, explaining at the same time that he had to come a little earlier than planned. And the girls started floating in the air, as if they were being ejected from it. He used magic, after which the carriage returned to its normal state. The coachman and horses were fine too, and Amelia was starting to think this guy wasn't hostile. Then she remembered Ranella's parents, and realized her brother was a dead ringer for their dad, and the daughter for their mom. Plus, it seemed like the brother and sister actually got along pretty well. But something still felt off to the saint, and she took a closer look at their fake smiles. She realized both of these bastards were putting on an act, pretending something was real when it wasn't. Ranella then asked why her brother had attacked their carriage. He explained that he'd smelled a monster, and the saint remembered she was still covered in monster goo. Still, this guy's actions seemed like overkill, and introducing herself as a saint, she let him know he'd ruined her mood. Veron Nestro offered his sincerest apologies, admitting he'd acted too hastily. And he just got chewed out again, told he should find out the facts first before resorting to violence. Ranella jumped in to apologize right after her brother, hoping it'd calm the saint's rage. Both Nestros were being all polite, like they'd rehearsed it beforehand. Ranella was even going to tag along with her brother to really hammer home how close they were. Emiliona didn't try to stop them, especially since she needed time to think things over. Back in her room, the saint decided to chill out in the bath for a bit, and that wound that Prince gave her was still throbbing, and in moments like these, she didn't want to be a saint. Even though she was packed with divine power, she couldn't heal herself. The only good thing was that she healed faster than most people. Emiliona didn't get why she was still feeling pain, and Veron was bugging her a little too. He smelled a monster, and only people with divine power can do that. Either way, the girl really didn't want that kind of situation happening again. It also kinda ticked her off that the prince didn't even thank her after she saved his butt. So, to keep her mood from getting worse, the saint just kept scrubbing the monster blood off of herself. She was glad she'd taken down the beast, even if it was gross, creepy, and at times, terrifying. Later, Renabin showed up, the guy she'd asked to come earlier. She held out an envelope to him, asking him to deliver it to the imperial palace. It was intel on the monster that had wounded the prince. The saint had already dug up everything, because she knew the emperor would ask for any and all information about the whole incident. After that, Emiliona told her assistant he could go get some rest, but he wasn't in a hurry to leave, and reported that another letter had arrived for her from the palace. It said that instead of canceling the banquet, they're throwing a celebration for the saint. It's to show gratitude for saving the crown prince, who probably won't even be there since he's still sick. The girl paused, and the high priest figured she didn't want to be involved. But then she suddenly agreed and asked him to let the palace know her decision. This party's at the palace, and if Lady Nestro shows up, she'll probably drag her whole harem with her. For Emiliona, it was a chance to have some fun, so she wasn't about to miss out. After a while, Luan, the sanctuary manager, came to the saint and reminded her it was time to get ready. The girl was a little surprised at the rush, since the event wasn't supposed to start until evening. But Luan protested, saying the saint still needed to bathe, do her makeup, and choose a dress. Then she started nudging Emiliona towards the bath. Carefully, of course, but still wanting her to obey. The girl could tell this woman wasn't acting out of malice, but something about her was definitely different. At first, she'd avoid even looking at the saintess, but now she's acting like just a regular nanny, which shows Emiliona's become a true member of the sanctuary. After a while, Reneben was waiting for the saintess. Since they were supposed to head to the palace together, he knew getting ready would take some time. But it felt like it was taking way too long. And as he was killing time staring out the window, he heard her voice behind him. Turning around, Reneben saw Emiliona standing there, looking gorgeous, and he was completely speechless. All she did was modestly compliment him, saying he looked good today too. The priest suddenly found his voice and returned the compliment, praising her appearance. He felt great escorting such a beautiful woman. He even felt luckier than the prince. He was still worried about the saintess, though. She always steered clear of events like this. Back in the woods, something seemed to have really thrown her off balance. Emiliona was surprised he was so concerned. She thought Lady Nestra was all he ever thought about. Right now, she just apologized for making him worry. She also asked him not to think about her today, and to try and focus on himself. She was actually looking forward to what was about to happen. They soon arrived at the palace, and their arrival was announced in the main hall. The saintess had never taken part in anything like this before, and never thought she'd agree to it. But here she was. And silence fell over the hall the moment they walked in. They were probably talking about the sanctuary. A lot of aristocrats have been hostile to it since she became the saintess. But she was fair, making sure the shrine got what it deserved. Some just thought she was skimming money that should have been lining their pockets. Right now, Emiliona decided to forget about it and told Renabin to take a seat. Turns out they were a little early, giving them some time to chill and people watch. Before long, they announced the arrival of Lady Nestro and Duke Anisis Casian. Ranella was as beautiful and charming as ever, but the Duke was looking sharp today too. A dark-haired dude walked up to the saint, bowed, and said he was at her service. She didn't know who he was, so Renabin whispered in her ear that he's the second son of Count Motio. This guy was also in the hunting competition, but it looks like the saint didn't recognize him, which isn't surprising considering the accident and how busy she was helping the knights. The count got it and thanked her for gracing his people with her attention. He smiled, but Emiliona also saw arrogance and a sleazy, sizing her up look in his eyes. She started to dislike this guy, and when he asked her to dance, the saint refused. She basically told him to get lost, politely, and to make sure he'd back off, she took Renabin's arm and suggested a little walk. This, of course, really stung the count's son. Nobody had ever dared reject him like that. He wanted to protest, but Ranella and Anisis, who had approached the saint, interrupted him. The girls began chatting about the little things in life, and Duke Cassian glared angrily at Mozio, making it clear he should scram and not cause any more trouble. Emiliona noticed that now a lot of people had turned their attention to them. Back when she was just in Renabin, nobody even gave them a second glance. But the second Ranella and the Duke showed up, everyone swarmed them like bees on a hive. Then, Anisis thanked the saint for what happened back then, since he didn't get a chance to before. He gave a deep bow, thanking her for saving Ranella. His behavior showed he wasn't hostile toward the sanctuary, or he was just really good at hiding it. Still, Emiliona noticed that for some reason, this guy was looking at her like she was the enemy, though maybe she was imagining things. And besides, the young duchess had his attention again, and while Ranella was chirping away, the saint heard this weird sound. She had this bad feeling, but she couldn't figure out why the atmosphere had changed. Then the expensive crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling started to shake, and some of the candles even went out. Everything pointed to that chandelier being about to fall off its mount, which, you guessed it, it did. Duke Cassian barely managed to shield Lady Nestro before that massive light fixture crashed down on her. Renabin wanted to shove the saint out of the way so she wouldn't get hurt, but she stopped him, and instead focused her attention on the young duchess. But the chandelier was already hurtling towards the floor, and Emiliona barely managed to jump back herself to avoid being crushed by the weight of iron and glass. One shard did pierce her arm, but she quickly pulled it out, not wanting to worry Renabin, who was panicking, and she wanted to reassure him that she was barely hit, when suddenly she felt something strange. And the next moment, a wave of nausea hit her throat, but she still asked her assistant to inspect the chandelier. She wanted to know if there was anything weird about what happened, and wouldn't let Renabin check out her wound. A saint's request was an order for the priest, and he couldn't disobey. Meanwhile, panic broke out among the guests when they saw that some of them had been injured. I mean, obviously, shards flew everywhere, and the chandelier was hanging right over a crowd of people. Helio was standing nearby, staring in horror at a scratch on the back of his hand. Even though he was more scared than hurt, the saint went over to him to heal the wound. Laying her palm on top, she channeled a little divine power into the scratch, and his skin looked whole again, like he hadn't been scratched at all. Seeing this miracle, others started asking the saint to help them too. Luckily, none of them were seriously hurt. Emiliona decided to give them a similar healing and told them to calm down. It wasn't until now that she stood before the crowd and healed everyone at once. The cuts on their hands vanished instantly, and the guests were especially thrilled that not even scars remained. Once she was finished with the crowd, Emiliona turned to see if the Duke and Ranella were okay. Even though they were at a safe distance to begin with, it was still worth making sure. Just then, Renabin approached the saint and reported that there was a strange mark on the broken chain, like it had been deliberately cut. He couldn't find the tool that did it, and he suspected magic was involved. What's more, monster poison was found on many of the chandelier crystals. Now, Emiliona understood why she felt dizzy and nauseous. That's how monster poison affects her. Still, it seemed weird, because when healing others, she didn't notice any signs of poisoning on them. Meanwhile, the people were cheering, overjoyed that the saint had healed them. Boom! She tells everyone to shut their traps and claims the chandelier nearly clocked her. She was totally implying that someone did it on purpose, because they hate the sanctuary. So, she announced that the sanctuary is officially done with monster slaying, which means we're stuck going toe-to-toe with these freaks. Brute force only. People were pissed, because some monsters are crazy strong, the kind only priests can handle. Marquis Mitra rolls up to Emilione and tells her to chill out. He's the biggest shot of all the nobles in the empire. Plus, the whole monster lure idea was his. Now he's saying the saints just freaked from the chandelier, and we gotta keep our cool. He reminds her that monster slaying is the sanctuary's main gig, but she wasn't buying it. She tells him, real personal-like, that as the saint, she calls the shots around here. She's the one who hears God, brings prosperity and peace to the empire, and she's shutting down the vault for the people. The nobles started freaking out. They didn't understand what this meant, and the saint explained that God would punish them for treating her like this, and she didn't want that. Amelia decided to punish these little people herself and cut them off from the sanctuary's support, saying it's gotta be better than getting smited by the heavens. The Marquise disagreed and declared that, in that case, there was no reason for the sanctuary to even exist anymore. But the saint clarified that this was just a break until they found the culprit who tried to take her life. She was sure that even the emperor would agree to investigate and didn't believe it was an accident. Of course, the Marquise was worried that they wouldn't find the criminal, and then the sanctuary would never reopen. The girl stated that everything should have been checked before the festival, and they definitely would have noticed a faulty chandelier. After that, the Marquise clammed up. But that wasn't enough for the saint. She declared that, as God's representative, she was punishing all the nobles for their rotten behavior. Meanwhile, in one of the corners, a young guy with long silver hair just stood there, secretly watching how things played out. Emiliona left the palace, and when she got back, her caretaker started freaking out about her injury. The girl told her not to make a mountain out of a molehill and just asked for a bandage. At the same time, she knew that if that chandelier had crushed her, she'd be out cold for at least 3 months. And the thought that someone was out there trying to kill her totally freaked her out. She was thinking about getting out of here, maybe even going overseas, when Renabin knocked on her door. He brought her the bandages himself, plus he needed to talk to the saint. Working up his nerve, the priest declared that Emiliona had acted recklessly today. Besides, it's his duty to protect the saint's safety, and he should have been there for her. He was sorry Emiliona got hurt, and now blamed himself for not keeping a closer eye on her. Renabin's concerns were understandable, but the girl just wanted some peace, especially after being injured. And just as Renabin opened his mouth again to say something, she shoved a candy in it, asking him not to say things like that again, because it was getting on her nerves. She knew the guy was feeling guilty, and if they didn't sort it out, he wouldn't be able to sleep easy. Suddenly, Renabin's face twisted because of the candy. It tasted good, but it was herbal and had a weird smell. Still, he swallowed it down, and then the saint suggested he take a seat, and asked him to think about how people would react if today's situation had happened to the prince. People don't usually care about the pecking order, but the duke was quick to react and shield Lady Nestro. But the saint, who was in the most dangerous zone, was left out in the cold, even though she's above the duke's daughter. Like, Anasis the knight covered Ranella, but nobody called him out on it, cause nobody values the sanctuary. That thing that comes to the rescue at the first sign of trouble. That's why Emiliona put the people on lockdown, to show them how pathetic they really are without the sanctuary. No need to worry about the high-level monsters yet. Those only show up once a century. But if one does pop up, the saint's ready to make an exception and handle it, to keep it from hurting regular folks. Besides, there's no law that says she can't. Marquis Mitra was talking to his aide. He felt defeated and pissed off at the same time. It bugged him that Emiliona, who came out of nowhere, became the saint and is now calling the shots. He thought of her as just a kid who showed up a year ago, but she's gonna have a hard time going it alone. And the nobles are still putting in requests to have monsters exterminated. Plus, the Marchioness is pissed that the saint's got her nose in the air and swore she'll regret it. Meanwhile, they're sending requests to the sanctuary too, like they're saying the saint's worthless. They still haven't found the guy who cut the chandelier. even though the royal family promised they'd look into it. Renabin came to see Emilion, and she could tell he was completely wiped, like he never rests. But he's more worried about the saint, who's super annoyed by all these aristocrats. On top of that, there's a risk the sanctuary's going to end up in the red. Emilion knew perfectly well that the sanctuary's supposed to help people who need it. Renabin just reminded her of that too, saying he wasn't going to challenge her orders. But she understood the worry of a guy with innate divine power who was just too damn kind. Still, she wanted those nobles to rethink their attitude towards the sanctuary and their actions. On the flip side, when Emiliana put the monster extermination on hold, the priests who'd been working non-stop finally got a chance to catch some Z's. She sent the rest to the slums to deliver food and bring the sick and orphans back here. Emiliona told the high priest not to feel guilty about the nobles, and to not forget the common people who were getting screwed over by those high society types. Renabin hadn't forgotten that, which made the saint realize what he was ignoring. But it was clear to her the nobles were putting pressure on him, coming at him with complaints. Regular folks couldn't speak their minds, and Emiliona didn't want that to leave a bad taste. From now on, they'll get more people coming to them from the slums, and they won't ignore the sick. Emiliona had her own reasons when it came to the orphans. To honor the dead, she set up a small space inside the sanctuary to take care of the orphans. Now she wanted to find a place outside the sanctuary and was even thinking about building a special orphanage. Orphaned kids will stay there until they come of age. The whole thing's gotta be legalized too, so there aren't problems with taxes and other expenses. This also gives her a chance to reevaluate the tax amounts across the whole empire. Even though she doubts the emperor will let her do it, Emiliona decided to give it a shot. The girl figured this must be the main goal of the god who sent her to this world. Renabin's reaction to her intentions struck her as a little weird at first, but then he announced that he would work even harder from now on and promised to give it his all. The high priest's emotions were through the roof, though the saint was happy about his dedication. Later, she went to the library and stayed there reading books until late at night. She really loved being in the library, more than any other place in the sanctuary, because this room has a ton of romance novels. Whoever maintained this place probably had similar tastes to Emiliona, and that made her happy. She pulled out a book called Monster Love, and the title seemed promising. It's strange that a book with that title would even be in the sanctuary, but that didn't stop her from starting to read. The story began with a monster being born in the forest a long, long time ago. He watched people, thought about them, studied their food and clothes, and then one day, he possessed the body of a beautiful girl. He got to the village, but getting used to a human body was tough. He tripped and face-planted in the dirt. Out of nowhere, a guy showed up and helped her up. And bam, they fell head over heels for each other. But fate's a real jerk. Turns out the guy was a priest. Her life could be in serious danger. Eventually, the temple figured out the truth about the priest's sweetheart. They ordered him to kill her, but he couldn't bring himself to watch his love die. So, he decided to run away with her. But they couldn't outsmart the temple. The exiled priest ended up dying to save the monster girl. He died in her arms. The girl was heartbroken that she was a monster, not human like him. And that's how this story ended in tragedy. It was a real mind-blower for Emiliona, realizing a monster could think and feel love. Maybe it's right that the shrine judges guys like that, keeps them from hurting people. Setting her book aside, the saintess headed to Renabin, who was still up. Totally caught off guard. The guy actually jumped, and she gave him a little scolding, 'cause she told him not to overdo it. Then she got curious about what he was so engrossed in. The document said that Count Vassin, who was abusing those girls, was getting off scot-free. The saintess realized her assistant was gathering intel on criminals. This'll help her take down the rotten aristocrats and cut taxes. After that, His Majesty won't object, and their only enemies will be the nobles. Renabin used to know some of these guys pretty well, and couldn't believe they were involved in crimes. Emiliona understood that it was hard for the priest to punish even sinners. That's how kind he was. Again, she's on him, telling him to think about the people these crimes hurt. Renabin shouldn't feel guilty that these scumbags are going straight to hell. We can't just look the other way anymore, not for this. After that, Emiliona thanked her assistant for the good work and told him to get some rest. She was going to take the documents he gathered to the emperor herself. The next day, the saint announced the punishment of the sinful nobles and a tax reduction. The emperor agreed to approve the punishment, but only if the crimes were confirmed as true. 2 days later, Emiliona woke up to some noise coming from the street and wanted to go check it out. On the way, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror. A little rumpled and still sleepy. First, she decided to fix herself up a bit. Plus, Lewin was on her way over. Seeing her chance, the girl decided to find out what all the commotion was about from the shrine manager. And the manager relayed a rumor that they'd caught the guy who tried to off the saint not too long ago. But Lewin couldn't figure out why Emilian was acting like a kid with her restrictions. They would have caught him anyway. Still, she suggested Emilian come downstairs and see for herself. Emilian went down with Renabin, and there she found a crowd of priests and knights. The saint blessed them, then told them to raise their heads. And they reported that they'd caught one Jessie Fautre, suspected of trying to assassinate the saint. Emilian saw she was in shackles, and they explained she'd been putting up a fight. Plus, they had to use force, and now the seemingly frail girl was practically covered in bruises and cuts. The saint didn't want criminals punished like that, so she went to the poor girl to heal her wounds. But the second I reached for her, she started screaming like she was being murdered. Jessie's probably still traumatized and panicking, so we gotta hurry with the healing. And once the holy power kicked in, that's when the prisoner finally started to calm down. Her body didn't hurt anymore, but she was so shaken up she collapsed to her knees, and realizing who was in front of her, she started begging the saint for help. Emiliona asked Renabin to take the girl inside. She was going to interrogate her herself. The knights from the imperial palace who brought the prisoner. The saint sent packing. Just then, she heard a familiar voice, and turning around, saw Duke Cassian. He looked a little rattled and asked the saint if she could spare him a moment. His clothes were torn and dirty, because he'd been fighting a monster just recently. My people should be handling this, but things have been crazy in the duchy, so I haven't had the time. Still, that's not why I'm here. It's because the saintess herself asked the emperor to make the nobles pay for their sins. The girl noticed that the duke was pretty well informed. Turns out his own father was guilty, and he's ashamed he didn't realize it even after inheriting the title. The former duke was secretly abusing his power, but it's nothing compared to the sins of other nobles. It kind of surprised Emilian that Cassian considers abusing power a sin, and now he's here to thank her for exposing the former duke's evil deeds. He thought his father was a good man, but he believes any sin deserves punishment. Now Emilian was convinced Essesus really wasn't a bad guy. Besides, the duchy really started booming after he took over. She told him not to apologize for his father's sins, since he wasn't to blame. But Cassian kept pushing it. And he also apologized for letting the saint get hurt on that awful day. The implication was that he'd jumped to protect Lady Nestro right away, instead of saving the saint. As a knight who failed to shield the shrine's mistress, he felt he should be punished too. Technically, he was at fault, but Emiliana wasn't planning on punishing him. Plus, despite his title, he showed up himself and is genuinely sorry. So the saint decided to give him a warning and wanted to be sure he'd protect her if the situation ever happened again. The duke suddenly went silent, making the saint think his apologies weren't sincere. That's when he swore on the Cassian family honor that he truly felt guilty towards her. Still, he couldn't say for sure that he'd make the same choice again down the road. The woman smirked, a little slyly. Then she admitted she wasn't going to punish him, even though what he did was technically wrong. But she totally understood that he was just trying to protect someone he cared about more. And she didn't want to keep harping on it, so she wouldn't come off as a nag. Emiliona knew that feelings don't always lead you down a sensible path. And since Duke Cassia himself came to apologize, the saint was willing to let it slide. Still, one question was bugging her, and she couldn't shake it. Emiliona was curious what he saw in Lady Nestro, and this was her chance to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. The Duke paused for a second, like he was trying to remember something. But then he got all flustered, like he hadn't even realized he was into the Duchess before. It looked like the saint was grilling him about why he was in love. But judging by his reaction, the dude genuinely didn't know, which totally threw her for a loop. All he could say was that he just liked Ranella for who she was, plain and simple. After that, they said their goodbyes, and Emiliona went to freshen up a little. She was worried about Enesis, especially because he'd stumbled over his words and then bolted. When she was done washing up, another priest showed up to take the used towel. He also thanked the saint for everything she'd done, and she asked where Renabin had wandered off to. Someone saw him heading to the guest room at the end of the hall. So Emiliona went over there and heard a bunch of ruckus coming from inside. Jessie, the captive, was raising hell, and the high priest was trying to calm her down. But she already had a dagger and a vial in her hands, yelling at everyone to stay away from her. When Renabin saw the saintess, he was relieved she arrived, because he didn't know how to deal with the crazed prisoner. He just brought her some tea, but turns out she had a hidden dagger on her. The vial contained a sleeping potion with a scent, which Jessie intended to use to escape. But the saintess wasn't affected. She was more interested in why the prisoner hadn't been searched. This girl was just brought straight here, so it seems she hasn't interacted with anyone except the knights. Emiliona decided that this might actually work to their advantage. Then, she asked Jessie to calm down, explaining that they weren't planning on doing anything bad to her. The prisoner's outburst didn't stop, and she pointed the dagger right at the saintess. Then, out of nowhere, the weapon just slipped right out of her hand and clattered to the floor at Emiliona's feet, that ringing sound echoing in the room. The holy woman picked up the weapon, and the prisoner freaked, thinking this was it for her. Death staring her in the face, she started begging for forgiveness again, promising it wouldn't happen again. Emiliona gave her this mysterious look, trying to figure out the best way to deal with this girl. Just messing around, she raised the dagger, which scared the prisoner even more. Jessie Fort curled up into a ball, begging for mercy, pure terror written all over her face. But Emiliona told her to chill out, leaning in to explain she wasn't gonna cut her. She was curious why Jessie came to the sanctuary at all, even though she hadn't actually done anything. The girl kept insisting she was guilty, but the stuff she brought with her told a different story. The way she was freaking out just proved she was innocent, even more. And to prove it even further, Emiliona asked her to explain in detail how she dropped the chandelier. She wanted to know what tool was used, and demanded that she show the magic she used back then. And since the culprit couldn't explain how she did it, the answer was obvious. Jessie Fotra wasn't the person the saint was looking for. The imperial family's investigation probably didn't find anything, so they decided to frame someone. Now the saint was interested in who was behind it. Probably this girl was threatened, so much so that she started insisting again that it was all her fault. She had to hide the truth and convince the saint of her words. Otherwise, her parents would be in danger. Emiliona got tired of hearing these screams. She asked Jessie to shut up and listen carefully, because she's convinced the girl's innocent, and honestly, her acting is pretty terrible. The saintess also figured out that this girl's seriously worried about her family. So to calm her down, Emiliona asked Renabin to send someone to Baron Fothra's estate. Jessie's parents need to be brought to the sanctuary and told this is all for their daughter. Turning back to the girl, the saintess promised to help her get out of this mess. Hope flickered in Jessie's tear-filled eyes. Emiliona also took the poor girl's hand and promised to do everything possible to save her family. After that, Jessie let all her real emotions out, bursting into tears and hugging the saintess. Later, Renabin knocked on Emiliona's door. He'd heard Jessie was moved to another room, and the saintess confirmed she was just looking after her. All right, this girl's not a criminal anymore. She's a guest of the shrine, fed and given new clothes. Renabin wasn't surprised by the saint's kindness. He reported that a carriage had already been sent to the baron's estate. Then, Emiliona asked him to sit down, because she had something else she needed to talk to him about. For Jessie, she offered some candy, hoping to make her feel a little more relaxed. And yeah, these were the same candies she'd given Renabin not too long ago. The guest's reaction was just like the high priest's. The girl practically turned green from their effect. She thought the taste was awful too, and she started to doubt if they were even edible. Emiliona explained that you have to chew them slowly, and Renabin remembered his own bitter experience. The saint even felt a little awkward that nobody had appreciated the candy for what it was supposed to be. But that wasn't the point right now. Once Jessie's face returned to normal, the saint asked her to tell her everything from the start, and she confessed that her family's been on the verge of total collapse lately. Her uncle, Marquis Tsaron, snatched their mine, which was their only source of income. They also inherited his debts, and a week before the banquet, some dude showed up and offered them cash for a favor. He said a chandelier would fall, and a few days later, Jessie had to show up and take the fall for it. He also threatened that if anything went sideways, her family would be in serious danger. Jessie didn't know anything about this creep, so Renabin started asking for any details she could remember. The only thing the girl noticed was a mark on his wrist when he pulled out the bag of money. It was 2 snakes biting an eagle's wings, and the priests figured out it was an anti-divine sect. They're a society of dark mages, secretly committing atrocities, and they don't recognize the sanctuary. And since they always operate in the shadows, there's almost no intel on them. Emiliona suggested Jessie stay at the sanctuary for now, seeing as this whole thing involves cultists. She couldn't exactly promise comfort, since Jessie arrived as a criminal and was going to get a lot of side-eye. But for Jessie, that wasn't so scary compared to what she'd already been through. Then, she thanked them for giving her a shot, and promised she'd stay on the saint's side no matter what. She also asked them not to call her by her title, and promised to help however she could. Emiliona agreed, when suddenly Renabin spoke up, and asked them to drop the formalities with him too, to just chill and be casual. It was what he really wanted. That meant they could switch to first names, and Renabin confessed it would make him way more comfortable. At first, the saint was going to say no, but seeing his pleading face, she caved. The next night was supposed to be relatively peaceful, but when Emiliona was wandering the halls, because she couldn't sleep, she saw someone she never expected to see there. It was Veron Nestro, and he had this weird, surprised look on his face. The holy woman figured she and her sister had some kind of family tradition, showing up unannounced. What she found even stranger was Veron admitting he wasn't trying to run into her. He'd used invisibility magic, but Emiliona had still spotted him, and putting on an innocent face, he asked her not to get the wrong idea. The holy woman didn't know why he was there, but she wasn't happy he'd barged into her office without permission. Then she started grilling him about the reason for his visit. But Veron looked around and said he smelled something that was getting stronger. Taking a step closer to Emiliona, he reached out to her and declared that the source of it was her. Then he leaned in real close, like he was trying to get a sneaky whiff of her, only it was kinda creepy. The girl immediately slapped his hand away and reminded him she'd lifted the ban on monster extermination. But it didn't seem like that's what the young duke was getting at. Unexpectedly, he then suggested making a deal with the saint. He didn't go into a lot of detail, just warned her to keep her hands off his sister, which was a problem, because the saint was responsible for Renella's safety and was worried about her. Veron promised to handle her problems himself and told Emiliona not to sweat it. After all, he's the family heir. He can handle things, and he looked dead serious about it. Without hesitating, the saint took his hand and kissed it as a sign of respect, and announced she agreed to his terms, but was curious how he planned to pay her back for it. That loaded question caught the Duke completely off guard for a second. But then, with a confident, commanding voice, he promised he'd protect her. Emiliona could count on him if she was ever in danger, seeing as he's a high-level mage with experience. That made her realize that chandelier incidents were going to keep happening, and Veron's offer was starting to sound good. She gave her consent, but the Duke reminded her again that she wasn't to touch Lady Nestro, and if there was no physical contact, they could totally hang out without any problems. Veroni also told her to call him if she needed anything, especially since he was looking forward to it. The next morning, Emiliona overslept, and Jessie and Renabin came to wake her up. She barely managed to open her eyes, since she couldn't get any decent sleep thanks to her late-night visitor. Still, she had to get up, and she forced herself to roll out of bed. Seeing how she was doing, Jessie offered her some ice water, which really perked the saint up. Then, Renabin wrapped her in a shawl that smelled like Tito's, which Emilion loved, and she was super touched that the priest remembered such a small detail and went out of his way to spray the shawl with it. Now, to protect people this kind, the saint's gotta win, no matter what. Today was a big day. There was a meeting in the huge hall, and Marquis Mitra showed up too. He was furious that the saint hadn't just threatened him at the last banquet, but also stripped a bunch of aristocrats of their titles, and now she's starting some kind of game with them. The Marquis felt disgraced, but he was determined to keep fighting her. Soon enough, Emiliona herself arrived and took her place on the carved chair like it was a throne. Her spot was on a small pedestal, surrounded by a little railing. The Marquis was sitting in the front row, absolutely seething that he had to grovel before this woman. As much as he wanted to cause a scene, he knew he had to keep it together. He was certain this was the last time she'd be looking down her nose at him, and greeted her politely. All the while, he was figuring out how to get rid of her ASAP, seeing her as a threat to the Empire's stability. That's why he'd gotten his hands on a potent poison, strong enough to take down even a saint. The temple would lose their precious saint without even knowing what hit them, and the Marquis would keep his fortune. Just then, Emilion was served a cup with the drink containing the poison, and the saint took her first sip, after which Myrta was just waiting for her to kick the bucket. Suddenly, Emilion looked surprised, but her voice still sounded strong. That put the Marquis on edge, especially since she was staring right at him. Then, wiping the last drops from her lip, she announced that she'd detected poison in her drink. The hall erupted in chaos. The high priest had served her the drink, and people couldn't believe he'd do that. Renabin immediately turned green with fear and anxiety, and started insisting he had nothing to do with it. But the saint wasn't about to accuse him, and just asked him to calm down. Emiliona realized that someone among those present still wanted her dead. People started exchanging glances, and the Marquis wondered why the saint suspected her guess, especially since they were all in the sanctuary, and priests had brewed the tea. The other guests chimed in, saying only the priests had access to the drink, so it had to be one of them. The tea itself is made from the leaves of a plant that grows in the garden. It's possible the poison got into the tea during brewing, but the saint didn't think it was the priests or servants. Even though someone could have been bought off just like Jesse, Helio suddenly stepped up and asked everyone to calm down. First things first, they needed to make damn sure Emiliona was okay, and she confirmed herself that she was fine, especially since she heals fast. They decided to continue the meeting, especially since they needed to find the perp hiding among the guests. The Marquis was the first to object, doubting that anyone among the aristocrats would try to off a saint. He didn't get where the thinker was getting his confidence from, since nobody got close to her. Helio had never heard anyone from the sanctuary complain about the saint, so the bad guys gotta be among the guests. He didn't believe it could be the work of one of the priests, and if someone slipped poison in without getting near the tea, then everyone automatically becomes a suspect. The Marquis glared at Helio like he was ready to strangle him with his own tongue, but he wasn't about to point fingers, especially since the saint had the final say. Emiliona noticed Marquis Mitra had a weird look on his face, like he knew something about what happened, but she kept the meeting going, saying she wasn't backing down. She demanded tax cuts and promised shelters would be popping up in every district soon. Then she asked if anyone was against it, and the Marquis was the first to speak up. Suddenly, the whole building started shaking, and people freaked out. It felt like an earthquake, and Renabin told everyone to look outside. The girl ran to the window and saw exactly what she expected. You could see signs of a monster showing up in the courtyard. The panic just got worse, since they were on holy ground, and the saint told everyone to calm down. Renabin crunched the numbers and reported about 10 monsters, give or take. Emiliona told him, and the other priests, to head outside the sanctuary and help evacuate the people. Even though the high priest wanted to stay with the saintess to protect her, she explained that if the monsters broke loose, things would get a whole lot worse. Saving the people was priority one. As much as Renabin disagreed, he obeyed her command. But then the Marquis piped up again, and he sounded pissed, real pissed. He demanded the saintess stop standing around like a statue and go catch those freaking monsters. Besides, he wasn't asking her a favor. He reminded her that monster slaying was her damn job. The people started begging her to get rid of the monsters, because there was no one else who could do it. But Emiliona turned to Jesse and asked him to name the mages and knights who were among the guests. Then she asked for silence in the hall, and for those whose names were called to come forward. A lot of priests are away right now, so the sanctuary doesn't have the manpower to handle these monsters. That's why we need the help of those who can use force. A wave of panic washed over the guests again. They were scared and knew they could die there, especially since these monsters are so huge, they could swallow a person whole. Emiliona saw that everyone was terrified, but right now, they didn't have any other choice. Then, in an authoritative but reassuring voice, the saint asked everyone to cast aside their fear and unite. Kashin figured the monsters were high level, and they could only distract them and land a couple of hits. For the saint, that was enough. She was going to handle the extermination herself. The Duke agreed, then turned to the others, telling them not to stand around like logs, but to start acting. He sent the knights ahead first, followed by the mages, reminding everyone to obey the saint's orders. Still swallowing down their fear, they agreed to fight the monsters. The saint liked how smoothly he'd managed to control the crowd and thanked him. He just apologized for stepping in without permission, while doubting they could accomplish much with so few people. But Emiliona reassured him that she'd protect everyone and send them home safe. Enesis knew himself that he shouldn't worry with the saint around, but something still felt off. Soon the battle with the monsters began, and the mages attacked with specialized spells. And when the monsters were blasted with energy, the knights moved in to finish them off with their weapons. After each strike, they had to retreat to avoid getting hit back by the creature. Duke Cassian was also fighting among them, letting the saint know when it was her moment to strike the monster. This chick was going full-on berserker, all while wondering if the news even reached the palace. If it did, they gotta be sending backup, right? Once they get here, we can finally start the evacuation. Plus, with reinforcements, we can wipe out these freaks way faster. Emiliona's eyes locked onto one monster that looked seriously messed up and weird. This huge purple blob looked like a giant turd, covered in spikes and blisters, like a bad allergic reaction. But that thing? It was already toast. The other monsters, the ones we hadn't gotten to yet, started slamming themselves against the temple walls. The walls started crumbling. It was like these things were deliberately trying to tear the whole place down. One of the monsters broke through and landed like a big, gross snot ball right in the middle of town, and everyone freaked. Renabin, the guy in charge of the evacuation, was yelling at everyone to calm the hell down. Emily was freaking out. First things first, she had to deal with the one that broke through. Then she totally panicked when she saw a terrified kid running down the street. The poor kid tripped and fell, skidding along the ground. He was so scared. To keep the monster from grabbing him, the saintess rushed to get that kid to safety. Meanwhile, Marquis Mitra had a monster chasing after him. The aristocrat was scared shitless. He didn't want to die like this, especially not so soon. That's when he spotted a kid sitting on the ground, bawling his eyes out. Without even a second thought, the Marquis grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, clearly planning to use him as bait. Emily understood exactly what this guy was up to, and she lost it. The Marquis actually threw the kid at the monster so he could get away while it was eating. The saint got a running start, leaped high, and snatched that kid up just before she became Monster Chow. The monster then fired off its spikes, hitting Emiliona and scratching her up pretty good. Right then, Duke Cassian showed up and sliced the beast in half with his sword. It crashed to the ground, splattering green blood everywhere, but Enesis was more worried about the saint. The girl dropped to her knees, not making a sound. She was still holding the little girl tight, who was still whimpering from the scare. Emiliona couldn't believe anyone would use a kid as bait. The Marquis used commoners before, and always tried to survive on his own. Now she thought he was the most shameless dirtbag ever, and she wanted to toss him to the monster herself. Just then, energy started swirling around her, like tiny bolts of lightning crackling in the air. And then, BAM! A flash of light so bright it blinded anyone who was facing it. Seeing that, Helios started to realize this was the power only the first saint had ever awakened. Some thought it was divine punishment, but Renabin freaked out, worried something terrible had happened to Lady Emilion. The shockwave from that flash blasted across the whole area, leaving nothing but little piles of ash where the monsters used to be. The saint then turned to the little girl she was holding, hoping she was okay. Duke Cassian rushed to Emilion's side, worried she'd been hurt. The saint only managed to tell him to take care of the girl before she started to fade out. After a while, the girl came to, and when she opened her eyes, she saw it was already night outside. She found herself in a bed, her hands bandaged, and she knew the people from the sanctuary had taken care of her. But then, she felt someone standing behind the closed door. Emiliona figured out it was Mr. Nestro, and when he came in, he asked how she was doing. He showed up the second he got the news, and she was surprised he even cared about that kind of thing. Veron just explained he could have been there way sooner if she'd called him, like they agreed. And the saint remembered him talking about the scent getting stronger, like he could feel monsters coming. Then again, he could have been behind the whole thing, but someone like that probably wouldn't show up to help. So the girl promised she'd hit him up next time she needed something. Then, the Duke bragged about using magic to fix everything that got wrecked. The priests checked everything over, and there wasn't a trace of the monsters left. Veron figured the saint used divine punishment, 'cause there weren't even bodies left of the freaks. They were burned to a crisp. Emiliona realized it happened in a fit of her all-consuming rage, which exploded as holy power. After thanking the Duke for his help, she decided to get the details from the priests later. She also found out Lady Ranella came by, but Renabin turned her away, claiming the saint was totally exhausted and needed her rest. Emilione found that hilarious, since Renabin's got a major crush on Lady Nestro. It also made her wonder what Ranella's angling for these days, though she could have figured the crown prince might be here. The saint got a little flustered when Veron asked if she liked his sister too, and she vaguely explained that a lot of people were fond of the lady. I mean, everyone thinks Lady Ranella's sweet and kind, plus she's gorgeous. And while Emilione was explaining, Veron was staring at her, like he was analyzing every twitch. And she kept giggling about how Lady Nestro was one of a kind, nobody else like her in the whole empire. After that, the Duke decided to leave the Saintess, saying his parents would be worried, which was kinda weird considering he's a grown-ass man. And his excuse for coming back to the estate so late, so as not to bother them, sounded even weirder. Still, the Saintess thought he was really considerate of his parents, especially compared to his sister. From the moment they met, Emilione thought he was a total enigma. After a while, the Saintess got what she wanted. She didn't even expect things to work out so fast. Even the Marquis, who was openly showing his displeasure, ended up agreeing with her. Clearly, everyone was charmed, and Helio was stoked he knew personally the Saintess who used divine punishment. Old records say that divine punishment helps to quickly eliminate a target. The thinker didn't know the details, but only the first saint could wield that kind of power. Now, Emiliona understood. Everyone had tucked their tails between their legs because they were scared of her strength. She noticed Helio still wanted to say something, and he confessed he'd looked into the chandelier incident. He was told poison traces were found on the shards, and he immediately identified it. It prevented poisoning symptoms from appearing, and this poison was unique. This kind of poison can attract nearby divine power. It reacts to it. Plus, magic was used in the brewing process, so the state of the substance usually doesn't matter. It just needs the right conditions. And this kind of poison can spread, even when it's in liquid form. As soon as it enters the danger zone, anyone with divine power is immediately affected. Renabin didn't show any signs of poisoning, though, and his recovery's way slower. Thing is, Lady Emelian's power is just on a whole other level compared to the High Priest, so the poison only really affected her, and probably for some messed up personal reasons. Now the Saint's even more determined to get to the bottom of this, and Helio telling her this in person means that the same poison was used at yesterday's meeting. So, there was no need to slip the poison into the cup. They just had to wait for her to start drinking. Then, the bad guy could have confidently claimed the drink was spiked. Helio felt the same way, and now they gotta find that bottle so the Saint has proof. They didn't get a chance to search anything yesterday with the monster chaos, so the culprit could have easily ditched the evidence. Renabin wouldn't give up, though, and decided to search the area. Their conversation got cut short when that girl they rescued walked into the room. Emiliona recognized her right away, even though she was all cleaned up and wearing a fancy dress. The girl was stoked to see the Saint again, but Jessie hushed her, saying it wasn't polite to yell like that. Then she apologized to the Saint, explaining she brought the kid because she was throwing a fit. Turns out, this little girl had something she wanted to give Lady Emiliona. She'd found this thing yesterday, and it looked super important to her, so she brought it over. Then she held out an empty vial, and everyone realized it was the very bottle they'd been searching for. This was the smoking gun, and Marquis Mitra was sentenced to death. The Imperial Court figured out the bottle belonged to him and found him guilty of trying to off the Saint. They also pinned the chandelier incident on him, even though he denied it. The Emperor wouldn't even listen. He just wanted to get it over with. The Marquis got what he deserved, just bad timing for him. As a final warning, the Saint was told to be careful, or the Empire would descend into chaos. To Emiliona, that sounded like a straight-up threat. Right after that, his head was chopped off, just like the sentence said. Emiliona hoped nothing like that would happen again soon, but she decided to start training her body. Right now, she has divine power, but divine punishment drains a ton of physical strength. This time, she collapsed. Not because of blood loss, but because she'd used up all her energy. And if she sharpens her combat skills and swordsmanship, it'll be easier to resist the anti-divine cult. Emiliona hired a skilled knight as her teacher, someone who'd noticed her natural talent. And in the next lesson, he promised to show her how to get her breathing back on track. This dog, like several times bigger than her, was trying to befriend that little girl. Her name's Chen Ina, and for now, she's living at the shrine, because they haven't found her a family yet. But she adapted to the new place real quick, which is something most adults can't even do. This little one right here is actually the one who brought the dog in, because he was just standing at the shrine entrance, and she decided to let him in. She really liked his fur, but it didn't even cross her mind that he might have an owner. Since there wasn't anyone around, Chen figured he was just as lonely as she was. She was also worried the holy woman would be pissed, but she was just worried the dog wouldn't bite. Emiliona noticed the girl was a little dirty and asked someone to get Jessie to change the little one's clothes. She even got curious about why Chen was alone. Turns out everyone's busy decorating the garden. Everyone was busy getting ready for the goddess festival, and Emilione suggested Chen go play with her friends. That's when the girl lowered her head, looking all embarrassed, which made it clear the other kids were messing with her, and the Saint felt real bad for her. But then, a dog started circling him, hinting he'd be happy to play with the girl himself. Emilione noticed the animal was being super caring, and when she petted him, he flopped on his back, wanting her to rub his belly too. But Chen decided to handle that. She really loved how the dog started wiggling his paws and tail from the pleasure. Then the girl asked Lady Emilione to scratch his belly too. She hesitated a little, but still dipped her fingers into his thick, long, shimmering fur, which really was so soft, she didn't want to stop touching him now. The critter looked clean and cute, so the girl figured she'd let him hang here for a bit. Just then, Jessie came running up, totally out of breath. She got word that Chen needed her, so she was hurrying over, and seeing the dog kinda surprised her. The kid didn't want to ditch her new buddy, but the Saint told her she needed to change and grab some grub. So, after saying goodbye to the dog, she obediently followed Jessie. Emiliona knew the little one wanted to keep playing with her new friend, but you can't live on games alone. Besides, the dog probably has a family somewhere, and they're probably worried sick about him. The saint offered to help the pooch find his owners, but all of a sudden, he took off like a shot. The girl immediately chased after him and saw that he'd bolted into the garden, but then disappeared. And while Emiliona was trying to spot him, he popped up out of nowhere. To top it off, the mutt, looking all happy, jumped on the saint, just wanting to play. The girl wasn't scared at all. She got what he wanted. But it tickled when he started licking her cheeks. And just as she decided to have a little fun with the goofy critter, a shadow loomed over her. Looking up, Emiliona saw His Highness, who wasn't exactly sure what he was looking at. She felt super awkward, since he could think she'd forgotten all the rules. The prince definitely wasn't thrilled to be greeted while she was flat on her back, and he grabbed the dog. Then he hurled it away with such anger that the saint got pissed. The excuse was lame. Cassidra decided the dog had broken into the sanctuary and was even trying to seduce the saint. Emiliona wanted to explain to this idiot that it was just a dog who wanted to play, when suddenly, she noticed that after landing, the dog had turned into a person. This dark-haired dude, not bad-looking, actually apologized for acting like a jerk. The saintess was totally stunned. No way this was the same cutie she was just playing with. Now instead of a dog, it's some beefcake, and his hair's even a different color. Still, she invited him for tea, and he was super charming, introducing himself as Unterven. The girl felt kinda bad for the guy after the prince tossed him around like a rag doll. He was from the Turvan County, and the saintess hadn't heard of anyone from there being able to shapeshift. Cassidra explained that this beast man was a half-breed. That's why he can switch between human and animal forms. Mixing bloodlines is a super sensitive topic, so most people don't know about it. Emiliona realized Turvan was one of a kind, but she wanted to know why Cassidra was visiting the sanctuary. Turns out, the crown prince showed up specifically to find Un, and he turned into a dog just to mess around. Still cracks him up even now. But Emilione wasn't finding it funny, and it kinda pissed her off. Un thought it was hilarious to transform and play with the girl he saw at the shrine. Plus, he wanted to meet the saint, but never had the chance before. But after all that went down, the girl's got some slightly awkward memories now, 'cause he jumped all over her, and she straight up told him that acting like that is just plain rude. Turvan agreed. He felt like crap, and now he's ready to take whatever punishment's coming. He just came off as too flippant to the saint again, like he thinks she won't do anything to him. Though, if he's heard anything about her, he should know she's not as nice as the previous saints. So, in the quiet lull, the prince decided to spill the beans on why he was really there. It wasn't just about Un. Cassidra was in on the whole thing, handing the saint a small fancy box. Inside was a scarf, just like Emiliona's, the one the prince snatched from her at that hunting competition. The one he took was trashed, so His Highness went out and bought a brand new, identical one. He also wanted to say a massive thank you for patching him up so well back at the sanctuary. Emiliona was a little thrown by how considerate the crown prince was suddenly being, but she'd be way happier if he just gave her a heads up before barging in next time. He confessed that Turvan had talked him into it. They must be tight since the county backs the prince. Un started deflecting, saying Cassidra was prepping for the visit himself, even getting a fancy box ready. The prince immediately shut him up and promised Emiliona he'd punish that animal. After that, they said their goodbyes, agreeing to meet up at the goddess festival. The saintess was just glad to see that Turvan con artist out of her sanctuary. Un went back to the guy he called his king, even though he told him not to, in case anyone overheard. But the room was protected by magic. Plus, Un had some interesting news to share. The mysterious man was intrigued, and he got ready to hear what he'd found out about Saint Emilion. Soon, the goddess festival arrived, a celebration where people thank the goddess and ask for her blessing. The festival happens once every 5 years, and it lasts a whole week. During that time, even warring countries have to agree to a peace treaty. A lot of people think this festival is a big deal, especially for the saintess. Even though Emiliona's just a regular person, she's called the Holy Maiden and becomes a god incarnate on festival day. That's why everyone at the shrine went all out to get her ready for this thing. Not only the aristocrats, but even the emperor himself will kneel before her at the festival. Protocol says the Holy Maiden's gotta keep her face covered, though. She's not supposed to show herself to commoners. But Emiliona decided to ditch that tradition this time. 'Cause today's all about her, and she wanted everyone to see her. The Holy Maiden even asked the High Priest to back her up, no matter what she does today. Tons of people were getting ready to greet her, and there was this one kid in the crowd. He was so busy staring, he tripped over a rock and ate dirt. But one of the soldiers just got pissed, 'cause the kid was blocking his way. So he starts shoving this little girl out of the way, calling her all sorts of nasty names while he's at it. Emiliona sees this whole ugly scene from her carriage and orders them to halt the march. The carriage stops, and the saint gets out, looking over to where the incident happened. Then she tells Renabin to sort out the mess and bring that kid to her, right now. The high priest immediately heads off to carry out the saint's orders. Meanwhile, the soldier's still dragging the girl, so pissed he's about ready to smack her. He didn't care that she got hurt. He was just mad that she ruined his day. But then Renabin shows up on horseback and orders him to let the kid go. He explains that the march was stopped because of him, and the saint's super unhappy with what he did, not wanting to get punished. The guy points at the girl, saying it's all her fault for getting in the way. Renabin warned him and ordered him back to his station pronto. He obeyed immediately, ditching the kid, just to avoid getting chewed out. Then, the high priest reached out to the child and asked her to come with him. Soon enough, he was back at the saint's carriage with the girl, reporting that everything was taken care of. Emiliona looked into the girl's wide, scared, and surprised eyes, asking her name. The little one was silent from the shock, and when Renabin told her to answer, she got super scared. Seeing the girl's condition, the saint asked the high priest to be gentler and not demand too much from the child. Then, she smiled sweetly at the girl and asked her again to tell her name. In a timid voice, the little girl said her name was Devel, and the saint patted her head. She really liked the girl's name, because it meant the sacred sound of a bell. The folks at the sanctuary ought to dig this, even though the kid had her doubts, since a lot of them laughed at him. The saint gave her some candy, told her not to sweat it, and introduced herself as Emiliona. That name also means a bird flying through a blue sky. Then the saint told the little one to come to the sanctuary if she ever had problems, and promised to give everyone there a heads up. And when that little girl shows up, they'd be happy to roll out the red carpet for her. That finally put Devel at ease, and she thanked the saint for always looking out for them. After that, Emiliona decided against going back to the carriage. She wanted to walk to the palace. On the way, she reached out to people and wished them blessings. The saint believed that her sincerity would touch their souls that day. Before long, she was back at the palace in a place of honor, with Renabin and Jessie by her side. One by one, the big shots lined up to greet God's gift to mankind. Emiliona had heard the aristocracy's attitude had shifted, and now she was seeing it firsthand. But what really surprised her was that not everyone's eyes were filled with scorn. Some of them were looking at the saint with genuine awe, second only to the imperial family. The emperor was now concerned with the saint's affairs, since thanks to her, no one dared defy the sanctuary anymore. Up until now, many had underestimated the sanctuary, but it wielded absolute power. Now, it was doubtful anyone would even think about going against them. For generations, the throne has belonged to one family, the Vesaloyal imperial family. But if you shake the power that's held strong all this time, you're going to have to deal with anyone who wants to do harm. Emiliona suddenly noticed Lady Nestra wasn't around, though she doubted she'd be lining up to kiss ass anyway. Renabin was getting curious about why the saint was looking for Ranella, but Emiliona implied that the high priest himself wouldn't mind seeing her. The guy immediately got embarrassed, and Jessie was surprised, since she'd heard he liked that lady. Renabin, already a little bummed out, asked Jessie to lay off comments like that. For him, the whole thing's ancient history, and he doesn't want anything to do with that girl anymore. Emiliona wouldn't let it go, though, and reminded him that he was in love with Ranella, which made him cringe. But then she figured maybe his feelings weren't that strong, so he got over it pretty quick. She used to think he was really in love with her, but his face wasn't showing any happiness. Suddenly, the saint caught a whiff of some kind of intoxicating fragrance. She even asked Renabin and Jessie if they could smell a sweet scent. Only Emiliona could smell it, which she thought was super weird. Looking around, she saw some dude getting shoved into a private box way in the back. This guy was trying to get into the main hall, but some fat cat, definitely an aristocrat, was blocking him. The saint got curious about what was going on, so she went to check it out. Renabin, her little sidekick and bodyguard, tagged along, but she told him to go get the knights. When she got to where all the action was, the saint demanded an explanation. There, in a small room on a couch, she saw the young man who apparently was trying to get to her. The guy looked scared and confused, but Emiliona couldn't help but notice how hot he was. It even seemed to her like she wasn't looking at a real person, but a living work of art. Catching herself daydreaming about this guy, the saint ordered the knights to grab the man who was holding him back. Then she went up to the stranger and asked if he was all right. She noticed the kingdom's crest on his jacket, which was lying crumpled nearby. Emilione doesn't know which country he's from, but everything points to this young guy being a prince. The guy apologized for causing such a commotion. After assuring him that nothing serious happened, the saint asked him to leave and not to worry. She even helped him to his feet, when suddenly she felt a slight dizziness. To avoid giving herself away, she asked Reneben to get this guy out of here. They covered his head with a cloth, so no one would suspect he was a prince, and he followed the high priest. After that, the chubby guy who wanted to get rid of the guest, Marquis Cheverly, fell to his knees before the saint. He apologized, claiming he was drunk and mistook his opponent, but the saint still didn't approve of his actions. She definitely got the vibe that this dude was looking to pull the same crap on someone else. Later, she went back to the hall and ran into His Highness. He noticed she was upset, and she told him that Marquis Cheverly was causing a scene. I mean, that's just messed up behavior towards guests who came to celebrate the goddess festival. So she asked Cassidra to make sure nothing like that happened again that day. Emilione didn't care if the Marquis just got confused. She wanted him to get what he deserved, and the prince ordered the knights to haul Marquis Cheverly off to the dungeon. The fatso freaked out and started begging for forgiveness, claiming it was just a minor slip-up. But the saintess wasn't buying his excuses, and he was dragged away. Then Reneben came back to her. He left the guest in the hallway with a servant, so he could get to his carriage from there. Emiliana almost felt bad he left so fast. She kinda wanted to chat with him, so she figured she'd grill that Marcus guy. And Jessie told her she knew the dude's family. Turns out, he really was a prince from the kingdom of Isia. For some reason, Emiliana got the feeling Marquis Cheverly didn't just jump that kid for no reason. She headed down to the room where they'd locked the scumbag in a cage, and he was still begging for mercy. He kept swearing it was an accident and promised it would never happen again. Then Jessie remembered rumors that the Marquis preferred playing with kids instead of adults. Hearing that the saint might find out the awful truth about him, the Marquis went white as a sheet and started shaking like a leaf. Then Emiliana found out the Marquis always took kids around 10 years old from commoner families or orphans. The saint knew this guy wasn't taking those kids for good reasons, and she felt her anger rising again. And she got curious why this dude wasn't on the list when Reneben was investigating. He reported that there was nothing to indicate the Marquis was doing anything evil. Everyone knew he was taking care of those kids. It sounded like without Cheverly, those kids would have died of hunger or disease. Getting closer to the Marquis's cage, the saint asked Reneben and Jessie to leave the room. After that, Cheverly noticed Emiliona's face change and got really scared, not knowing what she wanted from him. But she couldn't forgive the fact that because of this guy, the kids were traumatized at such a young age. Because of him, they probably kept blaming themselves for being helpless. That's why they put up with his antics. Knowing how things stood now, Emiliona wasn't going to forgive the villain and grabbed him by the neck, lifting him off the floor. He didn't understand why the saint cared about commoners. He himself considered them worthless. But the girl just got angrier and wanted to punish the scumbag somehow, when suddenly there was a knock at the door. And she tossed that Marquis on the floor, like a sack of potatoes, then let the visitor in. Turns out it was the prince, looking all cleaned up now, and he introduced himself as Alois. The saint introduced herself too, and asked how he ended up here. The prince knew he was causing trouble for the saint, and said his kingdom would handle the Marquis's sins, so he asked Emiliana not to interfere, cause they'd take care of him themselves. That caught her off guard a bit. She thought Alois hated conflict, but she agreed. And after thanking her, the prince asked again for permission to visit her sanctuary. That request was kinda unexpected too, but she didn't see any reason why he couldn't come by. After another thank you, Alois promised to give her a heads up before he visited. And while he was in the room, the saint smelled that same scent again, though she might have just been imagining it. The girl grabbed the prince's arm, wanting to ask him about something. He spun around sharply, giving Emilian a look that made her head spin again. Losing her balance, she fell to the floor, and since she was holding onto Alois, she dragged him down with her. The prince immediately caught himself and started apologizing, saying it was his fault the saint was in such an awkward spot. He offered her his hand, showing genuine concern, but the girl assured him she was fine, even though something inside her was still bugging her. Getting up, she finally explained that she'd caught a sweet scent at the banquet, and it seemed to be coming from the prince. His Highness blushed a little, like he'd been asked something inappropriate. Looking away guiltily, he explained that he had nothing to do with it. Realizing she was probably mistaken, Emilion apologized and let the guest go. Right then, the prince looked like a scared little deer, and he totally dodged the question. But Emilion was curious what kind of animal was hiding inside him, and why he wore a mask. It wasn't an easy question for her, and she made it her mission to figure him out. As for the Marquis, she ordered his title stripped and him exiled. That scumbag deserved what he got, and the saint thought she was being easy on him. Renabin and Jesse were to carry out the order, and the Marquis men were to be redirected to the temple. Emilione knew that the Kingdom of Easy would demand proper authorization, but she was determined to punish the Marquis for his disgusting actions. Jesse begged the saint to reconsider, since His Highness was unlikely to agree with her decision. Emilione wasn't backing down, especially since she'd already taken down plenty of nobles, and things were looking more and more chaotic. Odds are, nobody expects the Marquis' actions to ever come to light, and Emilione is about to shatter their expectations, so everyone knows what a monster he is. The price Cheverly has to pay might seem steep, but the saint saw no reason for leniency. Jessie realized that her beliefs weren't going to change her mind. Later, the Emperor summoned the saint, confused why she was getting worked up over commoners, especially with so many ambassadors in the palace. He didn't want to undermine his authority with trivial matters. This guy's the most influential figure in the empire, aside from the saint, and it pissed her off that these powerful people acted like this, turning a blind eye. In a situation like this, she figured their power would be better off in her hands. Emilione, right there in front of everyone, declared to His Majesty that he was wrong. The saint was totally abusing her high roller status during the festival, and now she's got the nerve to suggest they get on a first-name basis with the Emperor. Of course, His Majesty couldn't hold back his rage after that and demanded some respect, to which Emilione just told him to work on his manners and stop yelling at her. She wanted to see the perfect emperor standing before her. Before, she was just too scared to take responsibility, so she looked after a small temple. Now, she only needed one thing from the ruler, since no one else is bringing it up. Emilione was demanding he fulfill his moral duty because there's no get-out-of-jail-free card for nobles in the law, and she wants a person ruling the country who can understand her concerns and help out. The longer the conversation went on, the more it looked like the saint was pushing her luck, but she didn't see it that way. She wasn't about to let crime slide, because anyone who lets criminals get away with this stuff and only looks out for themselves isn't fit to rule, according to the saint. And with that, she turned and walked off. The Emperor was standing there, practically purple with rage, but he knew there was truth in her words. Plus, there's nothing he can do to a saint. As for Emilione herself, she was feeling great. Stepping out onto the street, she ran into Renabin, who looked super worried. Jess wasn't with him, but the saint figured she should give her some time to recover for now. Emilione knew she'd done something a saint shouldn't. She'd crossed the most powerful person in the empire. But she wasn't a real saint anyway. She just got blessed with divine power and wants to help the people at the bottom. She was going to help them rise up, because that's what the mission of a saint is all about. So, she's heading back to the sanctuary, told Renabin to take his time and come with the others later. The high priest watched her go for a bit, replaying her words in his head. It was all those things she did that made him love Lady Emilione. She hit the sack early that night and woke up feeling totally refreshed. During the holy festival, she's supposed to spend a ton of time at the palace, but she decided to stay at the temple. Besides, Renabin can handle her duties just fine without her. Now she can finally focus on her own stuff, so she took off to her favorite place, the library. She grabbed the Imperial Law Code, and that thing was seriously heavy. Most of the books about the aristocrats screwing over the common folk. Emilione wanted to make sure none of them could push people around like that ever again. We're gonna have to flesh out every section of the codex with some relevant clauses. Knowing that's gonna take forever, the saintess decided to head to her bedroom and start reading there. The room was on the second floor, which meant tackling a whole bunch of stairs, and while she was going up, Emilia totally spaced and tripped. She knew she was about to eat some stone, and the book was only dragging her down faster. She didn't even have time to pray before face-planting when she felt someone catch her just in time. She expected to see Renabin, who's usually lurking around, even though he should be at the palace right now. But when she looked up, Emilia saw Prince Alois. She was so surprised she even dropped the book, and it went clattering down the stairs. His Highness was glad the saintess recognized him, while she was more curious about what he was doing there, especially since he's alone without servants. And it's even weirder how he just showed up like a ghost at the perfect time. Still, she didn't forget to thank him for the help. But then she felt that weird dizziness again, just like before. The thought of why he showed up just wouldn't leave her head, so she decided to tread lightly and ask him about it. Alois explained he came alone because the royal family isn't exactly his biggest fan. Then, he immediately apologized, saying he wanted to keep his visit to the temple a secret from his dad. He sounded convincing, but the saint suspected he was hiding something, so she decided to play along and try to figure out what game he was playing. After saying she wasn't gonna rat him out to anyone, she asked why he was without his servants. And the prince, all innocent, said they were with him, but he just accidentally lost them. Emiliana pretended to believe him, while secretly trying to squeeze the truth out of him. But then she glanced down at her bare foot and realized she'd lost a slipper when she almost fell. Then it hit her. She was in her nightgown and robe, plus she hadn't washed her face and her hair was a mess. The girl felt super embarrassed and just wanted to get the hell out of there. Just as she picked up her pace, Alois stopped her, and she turned, thinking it might be something important. For him, it really was important to return the slipper she'd dropped. The prince had managed to pick it up and now helped the holy woman put it back on her foot. This scene kinda reminds you of Cinderella, and our girl probably read that story in her past life too. Except right now, the prince isn't offering her his hand in marriage, but handing her a huge-ass book she also dropped. For a second, Emiliana wished she was in a fairy tale. But then again, she finds exposing evil guys way more interesting. She thanked Alois for his help and let him carry the book to her room. Again, she replayed all his actions in her head and realized the prince was trying to seduce her. It was also clear to her that he wasn't really in love with her, just pretending to be, and it tickled her curiosity, something fierce, wondering what this dude wanted from her. The answer didn't take long to arrive. When they got there, Alois confessed he needed the saint's help. Knowing this was going to be a serious talk, Emiliona invited the prince into her study. There, he sheepishly admitted he felt a little guilty asking for her help, since they barely knew each other. The saint reminded him that she helped everyone and asked why he'd traveled so far. She also told him to drop all the worrying. At that moment, His Highness glanced at her, like she'd just fallen right into his trap. But the girl didn't forget for a second that this was a game, and she tried to play along as convincingly as possible. A spark flickered in the prince's eyes, but he kept up the sincere act and confessed that they were planning to bring back slavery in his kingdom. Emiliona feigned surprise. She knew the previous saint had abolished slavery there, but since she's no longer alive, the king's doing everything he can to undo it. The girl realized things were totally messed up outside the empire, and the prince kept acting like he was one of the good guys, against the whole slave thing. Right then, he sounded so believable. It was impossible to tell if he was telling the truth or lying. Alice is the fourth prince. His older brother is the heir, and he shares their father's views. He was worried that if slavery came back to their country, other nations would follow suit. Meanwhile, Alois was hoping he and the saint shared the same point of view. And again, with a sincere voice, he begged Emiliona to help him out. The saint knew full well that her position, as it stood, didn't belong to any one country, so she didn't have to just worry about the empire. She could lend a hand in other lands too. Besides, Emiliona knew the interest in slavery hadn't died down, and now they wanted to bring it back. The prince kept saying how ashamed he was that, as a prince, he couldn't do anything about it. Looking at him, the girl doubted he was powerless, and that also suggested he was up to something. Playing along, Emiliona agreed to help His Highness. Alois was genuinely happy after that, and the saint reminded him that they were on the same side. Truth is, she only agreed to figure out what a complicated opponent like him was planning. To do that, she needed to get that kid as close as possible. Sometime after the prince left, Emiliona got ready to meet with someone else, someone absolutely essential to her future plans, so she headed to see Jessie. After knocking and announcing herself, Emiliona opened the old creaky door. The room was dark and quiet, and she saw Jessie curled up in a ball on the bed. The girl was crying softly and got a little freaked out by the saint's sudden appearance. Emiliona realized she'd been too harsh with her earlier when she gave the order regarding the marquise. Coming closer and hugging her, the saint asked Jessie not to cry. She admitted she wasn't completely right either, and decided to confess why she got so angry. Jessie figured it was because the saint cares more about regular folks than any of those fancy nobles, and she totally nailed it, which is why Lady Emiliona gave her props. Now, Fautre realized the saint's anger wasn't a mistake, and she kinda felt bad for doubting her. She got it after she was told to bring in the kids the marquise was holding prisoner, and when Jessie saw them, she understood perfectly why Lady Emiliona was so pissed. She felt totally ashamed in front of the saint now, admitting she jumped to conclusions. Then, Emiliona got curious, wondering what this girl would do if the saint's path turned out to be wrong. But Jessie, forever grateful to the saint for saving her life, swore she'd back any decision she made. Emiliona shook her head, because she'd been misunderstood, and she explained to Jessie if she ever saw her doing something wrong, she had to talk her out of it. This wasn't an order, more like a gentle request, as Emiliana stroked her ward, who then agreed. On the third day of the festival, a letter arrived at the shrine from the County of Nestro, and along with it came its author, Countess Ranella, explaining that her arrival with the letter was purely accidental. You could tell by her mood that she was feeling way better than she had at the hunting tournament. Ranella decided to visit the saint because she'd heard rumors about what happened on the first day of the festival. Emiliona assured her that she was fine, but thanked her for her concern. After that, the Duchess asked her to call on her whenever she was free, and she'd gladly keep her company for a chat. She also timidly stated that she didn't want to steal the saint away from everyone else. But for the saint, it wasn't a problem, because she actually enjoyed being around Ranella. The Duchess herself had realized during the last reception that the saint wasn't letting anyone get close. So the fact that she's here right now? Yeah, that makes her kinda special. That was a pretty ballsy move. But Emiliona couldn't answer right away. Then she left her guest, saying she had to step out for a second. The girl needed to sort her thoughts out, like she'd been through this before, remembering all the times she'd spent with Ranella up until now. Emiliona figured out this lady was trying to get control over her, playing it real sly. Before, she thought the Duchess just disliked her, like she did all the other nobles. Now, things are even more confusing, so she needs to think through every possible move. The saint hadn't been back for a while, and Ranella was starting to get antsy. She even knocked over a big vase. Like that would make the time pass faster. Emiliona spotted her, just as she was heading back, but decided to hang back and see what would happen. She heard Ranella muttering about how she wasn't happy with the prince's or the saintess's reactions. This spot always made her uneasy, so she picked up a shard and held it up. Then she used her magic, and that broken vase was whole again, like it had never been dropped. Emiliona was a little surprised to learn Lady Nestro was a mage, though I guess it makes sense since her brother is one too. Now she was curious why the young Duchess was hiding that gift. Meanwhile, Ranella started muttering, wishing Emiliona would hurry back. Just hearing that woman say her name made the saintess feel uneasy. Deciding she'd waited long enough, she stepped out to greet the guest, who was back on that same couch. And when she saw Emiliona, she immediately plastered on this huge fake smile. Just saying, while I was waiting, I totally enjoyed the garden. Didn't get bored at all. This garden's the temple's pride and joy. The last saint poured her heart and soul into it. Jessie cut them off, looking kinda freaked, and announced the crown prince was here. Cassidra walked in with a bunch of knights and servants and noticed the ladies were having tea. Ranella, seeing him, wanted to flirt, but the saint cut her off, asking what he wanted. His explanation was kinda vague, like he couldn't catch her at the festival. But the saint didn't want to waste time on this guy and asked him again why he was here. Plus, he showed up unannounced, but he was worried she'd say no if he sent a letter. Now he's got some important business, and Emiliona ordered them to pour him some tea too. Ranella started suggesting he try some Esful tea. It's medicinal and only available at the temple. But the prince got curious about what the saintess herself was drinking. Finding out she preferred regular herbal tea, His Highness asked for one for himself too. Emilione tried to talk him out of it, knowing he might not like the taste, but Cassidra insisted. Soon, a cup of a green-tinted drink was served to him. After that, His Highness brought up the day the saintess argued with his father. The girl understood how it might look from the outside, but told the prince they just disagreed. Still, Cassidra asked her to apologize to the emperor, because he didn't mean her any harm. He just lacks empathy, since he's responsible for a huge country. That's why His Highness wants the saintess to make up with his father. Emilione even started laughing and told the prince to leave if that's all he came for. To her surprise, he agreed, like he wasn't even planning on arguing with her. Ranella suddenly noticed his tea had a weird smell and hinted he shouldn't drink it. Cassidra sniffed it, picked up on the odd aroma too, but the saint warned him it wasn't his thing. And then she immediately offered him those famous candies, adding that they tasted just like the tea. Plus, they boost concentration and clear your head. Emiliona stuck the jar practically under the prince's nose, and he gave her a suspicious look. He found it strange a saint would be into that stuff, but she confessed she wasn't the only one who liked them. Still, Cassidra refused to try them himself and passed the jar to his servant. He wanted to give them to the princess, figuring she'd be into that kind of thing. The saint was a little stunned, not quite understanding His Highness's moves. Then, out of nowhere, the jar they were about to put in the box slipped, and the servants freaked, thinking they were totally screwed. The prince's face twisted with rage, and he threatened to have the servant whipped for this. The servants instantly dropped to their knees, begging him not to be angry. Cassidra just snapped at the knights to haul these clumsy idiots away. They were immediately grabbed and dragged off, still pleading for mercy. This whole thing was rubbing the saint the wrong way, so she asked His Highness to call off the knights. The prince said he wasn't about to tarnish the temple's reputation and would punish the guilty back at the imperial palace. Emiliona didn't want anyone getting punished over some stupid jar, but Cassidra wasn't backing down. They broke his stuff, and people need to pay for their screw-ups. It was like the prince was equating a shattered jar to crimes committed by the nobility. He showed he could back down during the audience, so the saintess thought better of him than the emperor. But it looks like he's got some demons of his own, and Emiliona decided to play his game. She declared she was now disappointed in him because she asked him to recall the knights, and added that even though he's the crown prince, he's not allowed to go against her will. His Highness stood up to object, but then the young duchess cut in, and in a trembling voice begged them not to argue. She said it was hard for her to watch, and her heart already aches that the saintess's gift was broken. Then she added that since it was already the prince's item, it's up to him to decide the fate of the servants. It sounded smart, but cruel. Emiliona wasn't even expecting that, and feeling proud, His Highness started agreeing that Lady Nestra was right, and the saintess shouldn't interfere. She couldn't just let it go, not when it involved her gift, so she asked for the names of the servants. One's name is Tesh Oshap, and the other is Florin Realta. They answered in quiet, trembling voices, afraid the saintess would get even angrier. Then she found out that Tesh has a father, an aunt, and 3 nephews in his family. His father's sick, and his aunt can't walk, so he's raising his nephews all on his own. Emiliona realized that not all the prince's servants are rich aristocrats. Florin also has a father, mother, and younger sister. His dad works as a senior servant, and his sister's planning to get married. After that, the saintess hoped that the servants' stories had given the prince something to think about. But it didn't click for him what she meant, so she reminded him about her conversation with the emperor. Then she declared there was no need to punish the servants since she could give him all the candy he wanted. If he offs a guy, there's no bringing him back. Cassidra was a little stunned. He wasn't planning on killing them, just teaching them a lesson with the whip. But even that wasn't good enough for the saint, and she pleaded with him one last time to show mercy, adding that even after physical or mental punishment, you can still lose a person. And the saint wants to see a guy on the throne who actually knows what morality is. Cassidra's the future emperor after all, and she's hoping he's grasped the basics a leader needs. Finally, Emiliona asked him to think about what makes a ruler a ruler. The prince reported back to her like a school kid in class, saying a ruler always has to show his greatness. But then he went right back to his old self, grumbling that the people still need a strong hand. Listening to him, you'd think a ruler's power comes from crushing the weak. After that stunt, who knows how many people will actually follow His Highness. He's not the only one with family, the common folk do too, so the prince needs to be kinder to people. Cassidra wanted to argue with the saint, but she gave him such a stern, angry look that his words caught in his throat. He just cursed, realizing Emiliona was right, and headed for the exit. The Duchess immediately followed him, secretly hoping to comfort him somehow. And finally, she apologized to the saint, promising to send her word later. The servants who screwed up were still in the temple, wanting to personally thank the saint for her help. They bowed low, expressing their respect. After that, Emiliona asked them to report to the temple if the situation got worse. Later, the saint spoke with Jessie about Alois, the 4th prince of Essex. His mom was from the Istia clan, so this prince has a snowball's chance in hell of getting the throne. The Istia, they're a bunch of thieving nomads who roam the western part of the kingdom. But Jessie also found out that Duchess Nestro happens to be King Easy's younger sister. So that would make Alois the cousin of both Ronel and Verone. After a while, that prince came back to see the saint, and she, as usual, wished him blessings. Alois gently took her hand and kissed her wrist, thanking her for her warm welcome. Still holding her hand, he hesitated a bit before bringing up his request. She promised to help him prevent slavery after all, and now he was here to hash out the details. He also promised to pay a fair price, knowing the saint was the best person to tackle the problem. And by payment, he meant cash, fancy delicacies, and all sorts of jewels. Gifts like that weren't exactly going to impress a holy woman. Then Alois stopped, gave Emiliona a mysterious look, and smiled softly. He dropped to one knee and begged her to help him become king. Talk about a shock! Just the other day, she and Jessie were saying he barely had a shot. The prince knew he was way behind the other contenders. That's why he needed the saint's help. And they both knew she was the only one who could help him without messing up his reputation. If they worked together, it'd be way easier for him to build the kind of country he wanted. That gave Alois hope, and he was ready to give her anything, even the whole damn kingdom. Leaning in, His Highness asked in a gentle voice for permission to serve her. Emiliona knew damn well that if a kingdom fell under her control, it'd become property of the temple. A holy nation would be born from that. So the prince's offer was tempting. But they didn't know each other well enough to tackle problems this big. Emiliona asked the prince for some time, and he didn't push it. In the end, Alois Asea left empty-handed. The saint got back to work, and the next day, a children's home opened at the temple. Kids swarmed the entrance, stoked about their new home. And Renabin, who was handling their check-in, told them to take it easy and come in one at a time. But they're kids, right? They promised to behave, then bolted forward, almost knocking the high priest over. The little ones were hyped. It was clean and spacious inside, and there was a bed ready for each of them. The dining hall was so huge, it could fit everyone with room to spare. Emiliona watched from afar, stoked that the kids were digging it. And just as she was picturing the little ones settling into their new home, Prince Alois showed up again. He confessed he was interested in the orphanage and asked to take a look around. The holy woman didn't mind. She just worried the little kids might not give His Highness the proper respect. But he got that they were just kids, and besides, he wasn't throwing his weight around. So Emiliona invited him to have a look, while she gave everyone else a heads up about their important guest. She wasn't expecting to see him today, but it was also a chance to get to know him better. On the way through the garden, she noticed a girl named Devil reaching for some bushes and accidentally ripping her dress sleeve on the thorns. She also got scratched and freaked out, worried the holy woman would be mad. But she calmly healed her scratch and hoped the little girl liked her new home. So, she's gonna live here with the other kids, and Devil was super grateful. The saint also promised she'd always be welcome here, until she's grown and gets her life together. Which means the little one won't have to wander the streets anymore, scrounging for scraps. She'll always have a full belly and a warm bed under a roof. The girl was stoked. She loved this place, but she loved the saint even more. After that, Devil ran off to play with the other kids. Emiliona just told her to be careful and not fall. In just a couple hours, almost all the kids were settling in nicely. But then they heard some rustling in the bushes, and Emiliona went to check it out. Peeking through the leaves, she saw Chen, and it looked like the girl was hiding from someone. Emiliona told the little one not to sit in the bushes, so she wouldn't get hurt, plus the bugs might bite her. The little girl was taking her time, because she didn't want anyone to find her. Realizing the kid was scared, the saint asked her to tell her what happened. She confessed that Roy and Cheryl had been fighting a lot lately, and she didn't know whose side to take. That's why she hid, just to get a little time to herself. But then the girl jumped when she heard those two kids' voices nearby. Leaning over her, they looked kinda bummed out, since they'd been searching all over. But they immediately straightened up and greeted the saint, not wanting to be rude. After the whole hello thing, the kids started asking Chen to come play with them, and then started arguing. Cheryl thought Roy always suggested lame stuff, and told him to get lost. Sparks seemed to fly between them, and Chen got even more freaked out. Emiliona finally clued in that each of these kids wanted to play with Chen, but in their own way. Now she got why the little one was so bummed out. No wonder, with those two constantly at each other's throats, the kids demanded that Chen pick who she was going to play with, like right now. In that moment, it was even scarier looking at their faces, all twisted up with their beef against each other. The girl was totally lost. She didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, because the other one would be pissed. And while the little guys were distracted, the saint started racking her brain for a way to get them to chill. She suddenly heard a familiar voice behind her, and turning around, she saw His Highness Alois again. Then an idea popped into her head. Pass the buck to the prince and let him figure out how to get these three kids to make up. She quickly explained the situation to Alois, while Chen hid behind her. And the prince started thinking about how to point these little devils in the right direction in this situation. Something clicked for him, and he asked the saint for permission to talk to the kids alone. Emiliona didn't object, hoping he could help them connect with each other. Then, pretty loudly, he told the little ones to quiet down and give him their attention. He pulled out a flower bud from somewhere and explained it was unopened. While Cheryl and Roy's attention was on the bud, he suggested they let Chen play however she wanted. Next, he started doing a magic trick, covering the bud with a silk handkerchief, all while saying how both kids wanted Chen to only play with one of them. When he removed the cloth, the kids saw the flower had wilted, and half the petals had fallen off. Alice explained that the flower hates arguments and being ignored. It wants to play with everyone together, not just one at a time. After that, the prince asked the kids to do what the flower asked and play nice. Alois covered the flower again, saying someone agreed to play together. And when he pulled the cloth away, the kids saw a beautiful bouquet right there. Cheryl and Roy were stoked, mostly because the flower wilted and then turned into this awesome rose. Then His Highness introduced himself and explained that Chen's feelings were like these flowers. No matter how much they liked her, if they didn't listen to her, she'd be super bummed. But Cheryl got all huffy because Chen hadn't said anything was wrong, and she remembered losing track of her, only now noticing she was hiding behind the saint. That's the little one's way of showing she's not digging what's going on, louder than words. Then the prince asked the kids to think back to what he did to make the flower bloom. The kids all chimed in, saying they heard him and did exactly what he wanted. So we should treat people the same way, right? Listen to the folks you like to really understand them. It's also called respect, and His Highness wanted the kids to remember that. They needed to apologize to Chen for fighting over her, pulling her like she was a piece of cheese. Understanding this, the little guys went up to the girl, apologized, and promised to try not to argue. That calmed Chen down, and she gave them a sweet smile. The Saintess was happy too, 'cause not every prince can get along so easily with commoner kids. At that moment, Prince Alois really went up in her estimation. Soon, it was the festival's last day, and Emilion was discussing some business with Renabin. The Saintess pulled out an envelope, bragging she'd be getting something worthwhile from the Nestro Duchy. The High Priest got a little flustered. He thought accepting sudden offers like that was risky. At the same time, he knew Prince Alois was only after the throne, using the temple for support. But that didn't clash with their goals. The saint saw no reason for conflict, and it could even work in their favor. Emilia confessed to her assistant that she had something very interesting and dangerous planned. The High Priest was floored by such a blunt admission. The girl knew this would be a shock to him, as confirmed by his wide, staring eyes. Then she admitted she needed something from the guy who tried to get close to her using Jessie. Renabin, instantly remembering the chandelier incident, realized the saint meant the anti-divine cult. The girl doesn't know who the real culprit is yet, but she's got some hunches. It's just the situation hasn't allowed her to catch the scumbag who went after the saint. Besides, there wasn't any proof, and we had to protect the temple's reputation. Renabin suddenly got all worried, saying the saintess doesn't take care of herself. She'd jump through fire for anyone else, but she never thinks about herself. But Emiliona wasn't scared for her life, 'cause she knows she won't die. Her body heals fast. And patting her worried aide's head, she told him not to stress so much. Renabin calmed down a bit, but still asked her to be more careful. They arrived at the duchy, and Emiliona immediately noticed everyone giving her the stink eye. But the lady who invited her was nowhere to be seen for some reason. Renabin explained everyone's acting edgy 'cause of the saintess beef with the emperor. Then they headed into the main hall, where Ronella greeted them in a fancy dress and a great mood. She was worried about the saintess after that whole thing, but she was relieved to see she was doing fine. Then she turned her attention to Renabin and gave him a greeting just to be polite, apologizing right away that her welcome might not be up to snuff. Renabin got pissed, saying it totally wasn't, since Ronella didn't even come out to greet the saintess. Emiliona heard him loud and clear, and she couldn't believe he dared say that to the girl he loved. The High Priest's remark threw the Duchess for a loop, but she realized she screwed up. So, Emiliona decided to cut the tension by telling the hostess they hadn't had lunch yet. Ronella's mood instantly flipped, like someone hit a switch, and she invited them to follow her. She'd kept things low-key this time, since she wasn't sure the Saintess would actually show. Suddenly, a frantic maid ran up to them and addressed Lady Nestro. Emiliona knew something was up, plus she caught a whiff of something in the air. Right then, Ronella, super flustered, explained that her cousin was in the dining hall, and she'd just been told. Figuring it'd be awkward for the saint to eat with the prince, she decided to ask him to leave. But Emiliona cut her off. Now she understood why she'd smelled that sweet scent again. She definitely hadn't expected to see Alois here, but she also wasn't betting against it. Ronella was even more shocked when she realized those two already knew each other and had hung out recently. She instantly got nosy, wondering what they talked about, and braced herself to eavesdrop like it was the hottest gossip. Alois started by saying the saint had been a huge help when the Marquise framed him. Lady Nestra's reaction showed she had no clue about any of that. She got curious, but His Highness decided to keep the details to himself, and she got bummed out. But Alice told his cousin to drop the investigation and focus on the Saintess, since she's the guest of honor. The Duchess led everyone to the table and later asked if they were enjoying the food. Emiliona politely complimented the meal, saying everything was as amazing as always. Ronella also wanted to know what Renabin and her cousin thought of the dishes. Alois loved it, but the priest thought the meat was too tough and smelled kinda weird. Lady Nestro was completely shocked. He'd never spoken to her like that before. Still, she offered to have something else prepared. But Renabin refused, saying the Saintess was happy. Emiliona noticed he only acted that way around Ranella. He'd suddenly changed how he treated her. Suddenly, she decided to stir the pot a little and knocked over her wine glass. Emiliona spilled the drink all over herself, pretending it was an accident. Suddenly, every dude in the room was tripping over themselves about a little stain on her dress. The saint didn't expect that kind of freak out, but honestly, she was kinda digging it. The Duchess was just sitting there, totally shell-shocked, like she had no clue what just happened. Meanwhile, Alois booked it around the table and threw his cloak over the saint, hoping he didn't scare her. She thanked him, but Renabin shot him a jealous look, 'cause taking care of the saint was his job. He still chimed in, saying the prince's cloak might be too heavy for Lady Eliane. Ignoring him, the prince asked the saint to hang tight while he ordered a new outfit for her, which just proved to her that the prince was really trying to get on her good side. I mean, he's all sweet with the kids, and playing the doting gentleman with the saint, but Emilione was actually enjoying this kind of brazen behavior. So when the prince went to the maid to give her instructions about a clean dress, Emiliona confessed to the high priest that she was going to accept the prince's proposal. She didn't tell him why, but asked him to trust her, and Renabin had no choice but to agree. After a while, the saint received a new outfit and looked a lot like a noble aristocrat. It was beautiful, and the Duchess immediately showered Emiliona with compliments. She also heard praise about her appearance from His Highness Alois, after which he asked the saint for permission to escort her. Emiliona playfully agreed and offered him her hand, adding a sweet smile for good measure. And Ranella latched onto Renabin, wanting him to keep her company, since he promised to escort her last time. She had to refuse back then because of circumstances, but now it looks like he's decided to get revenge. To the Duchess, it sounded like she'd been dumped at her own wedding. Barely holding back tears, she begged him to at least tell her why he was backing out. The high priest just stood there, face like a block of ice. Emilione wished she could help him out, but she was stuck with Alois for now. She just hoped he'd pick up on her telepathic plea to accept Lady Nestro's offer. It worked, and the guy in the robe agreed to dance with the young Duchess. Emilione honestly had no idea how this would end for him, but she hoped it would all work out and turned her attention back to Prince Alois. Soon they entered the main hall, where their arrival was announced with fanfare. A lot of the guests immediately noticed them, some cool, some not so happy. The Saintess just blessed everyone with the goddess's grace, ignoring all the sour faces. After the greeting, she thanked His Highness for keeping her company, but he was stoked himself, getting to spend time with such a beautiful lady, and a saintess at that. And when he kissed her hand, a wave of surprised whispers swept through the hall. Some people figured they were falling for each other, and these whispers reached Emilione's ears. But everyone went silent when they announced His Highness, Cassidra's arrival. He looked pissed, and judging by the noble's questions, he wasn't expected at this shindig. The prince probably came looking for Ranella, and sensing his bad mood, the saintess decided to avoid him. She even turned away so he wouldn't spot her, when suddenly she heard his voice behind her. Forcing a smile, Emilione politely greeted him and asked what brought him here. Not like His Royal Highness needs an excuse to drop by the Duchy of Nestro, and questions like that just pissed him off even more. Then, Cassidra spotted Prince Aelios and was barely holding back from being a straight-up jerk. Instead, he mentioned that the Emperor was planning to reinstate Marquis Cheverly. He was trying to get under Alois's skin, but it just made the Saintess furious that he even brought it up. Surprisingly, she didn't even know about it, since she's just some lady living in the temple. Cassidra decided to argue that point, because she dedicated herself to the kingdom, making her automatically a citizen. Though that doesn't excuse her not knowing the news. Plus, the Empire wasn't about to fire a marquise over some petty crap. There was just one catch. To reverse the punishment, they needed the Saintess's okay. Obviously, Cassidra was trying to mess with Emiliona and Alois, since he was just casually dropping this in front of everyone. That's when the Saintess threatened to bail on the Vesaloyal Empire, said that way the prince wouldn't have to sweat it so much. That bombshell totally blindsided His Highness. You could see the color drain from his face, and he declared that Saintesses never left Vesaloyal, and they sure as hell didn't get hitched to the royal family. The girl just smirked, and behind them, people started whispering that she was leaving, and now who'd fight the monsters? Saintess Cassidra's departure and its dire consequences were clear to him, and he decided Alois must have been behind it somehow, which just stoked his rage even more. and the prince was barely holding back from kicking his ass right then and there. Noticing he was about to blow, the saintess told the prince to chill out. But his emotions were bursting out so hard, he snapped at Emiliona, telling her to knock it off. You can only imagine what would have happened next, but a huge crash from outside cut off their argument. Some guests screamed that it was a monster attack. Dark shapes with creepy glowing red eyes really did appear outside the windows. That's the third time they've shown up in a short period, like someone's staging this. Renaben thinks it's the anti-divine sect's doing, and the saint yelled at the terrified duchess to get everyone out of there, now! Again, no oracle warning before the monsters attacked, and judging by the fact they're showing up in front of the saint for the third time, she's the target. Panic ripped through the crowd, begging the saint for help because they didn't want to die. One guy even pleaded with her to destroy the monsters like she did back at the temple. But even if she wanted to, she couldn't pull that off right now. Hearing her refusal, people whined even more, saying they were gonna die, and they were so young. Truth is, Emiliona really didn't want to use divine punishment. It's way too powerful, and she still can't control it properly. From way across the room, a girl was sobbing over her mom, begging her to wake up. The saint told Renaben to help that woman. She needed to pull herself together. Dealing with these monsters was her job. They still got a little time to prep. The creatures haven't reached them yet. She spotted a dagger on Prince Los, who was just standing there frozen, and decided to borrow it. She's no knight, that's for sure. But this chick knew a thing or two and had no doubts she could handle it. Seeing what she was about to do, the high priest screamed like he was about to be torn apart by monsters himself. Emiliona just told him to chill out. Someone's got to deal with these freaks. Guess who suddenly decided he wanted to head to the front lines? Prince Alois. The holy woman was a little surprised, since he looked kinda scrawny, like he'd never held a sword in his life. He just has that build, but he's actually a knight, and I'm sure he can handle the monsters. Emiliona didn't argue with him anymore, but just asked him to come back alive. Then, he walked up to Prince Casidra and asked to borrow his sword, which was a little ballsy. He also told the crown prince to stay put. Casidra was a little lost, like a little kid, but agreed to evacuate. Then the holy woman came up to him and told him to hurry up if he wasn't going to help. He promised to stay in the rear and asked Alois to deal with the creatures as quickly as possible. This was the perfect time to call out the emperor's son for being a coward. But Emiliona held back. After looking around, she praised Alois for being the only one brave enough to challenge the monsters. The sound of shattering glass cut off the conversation, and the first monster was already climbing through the window. Renaben was ordered to create a holy barrier to deflect the monsters' attacks. At that very moment, several monsters that looked like ginger mutant apes stormed into the room. Their terrifying roars sent people scattering to every corner, but Emiliona was ready to fight the uninvited guests and started calling out to them, drawing their attention. The monsters turned their wrinkled, shaggy faces toward the saint. The girl was just glad their eyes were only on her, because that meant the others could evacuate safely. And without waiting for them to attack first, Emiliona charged toward them with a small dagger. Her fencing lessons were helping her even with this blade, and she kept slicing through their shaggy hides. The creatures were screaming in pain, trying to get around the guy attacking them. But the saint called Renaben in for backup, and he instantly appeared where he needed to be, taking out the monster's leg. Green blood sprayed everywhere, but Emiliona was stoked that they were almost done. This monster was still alive and looming over the Duchess with its massive bulk. Seeing this, the saint freaked out, promising to give her a serious beatdown if she survived. She was supposed to lead the people away and get out of here herself, but now she's curled up, eyes squeezed shut in fear. Ranella braced herself for the end, but when she opened her eyes, she saw the saint standing over her, not the monster. Emiliona managed to shove the beast back before it could rip the Duchess apart, but it snapped back to its senses real quick and got ready to tear into the one who ruined its dinner. Emiliona reacted instantly, dodging and jamming her dagger right into his soft spot, even though she wasn't aiming for it. But pulling the damn thing out was a struggle, like it was stuck, and the saint twisted the dagger a few times for good measure. She was fueled by the rage that this monster even got close to the Duchess. Now his agonizing scream echoed not just through the hall, but across the entire estate, and black smoke poured out of the monster. With a final shove, the creature breathed its last, and the saint hoped that was the end of it. But Prince Alois called out to her, yelling that there was still one more monster left. She barely had time to curse under her breath before the mutant ape tried to flatten her with its massive fists. Emiliona barely managed to jump back, and a new fanatic was already rushing to her aid. As soon as he plunged his sword into the monster, Alois signaled her to act, and the saint grabbed the monster's hide with her hands and started using her divine power to obliterate its very being. Just like the last one, the monster screamed bloody murder, and black smoke poured out of its eyes and mouth. This freak was dying the exact same way, and he ended up turning into this huge black blob. Then, out of it popped a fluffy orange tail, but way smaller than before. The black goo burst open, and Emiliona saw regular monkeys. While she was trying to figure out what the hell was going on, two little monkeys jumped right into her arms. Alice was kinda surprised to see these little critters. That's when the saint explained that they were baby monkeys, and this was their true form. His Highness noticed that Emiliona got hurt fighting those monsters. That wound looked pretty deep, and he told her she should get it taken care of as soon as possible. Right then, Renabin came over from the other side and started begging the saint to listen to the prince. He also said we should just kill the monkeys now, since they could turn back into monsters. Emiliana didn't like that idea at all, and the little guys got spooked, like they understood every word. She knew Renabin was probably right, but looking at their cute faces, she couldn't send them to their deaths. Honestly, she thought it'd be better to off whoever heartlessly used these little dudes in the first place. Right now, they're just monkeys who need some TLC. Emiliana handed them over to the high priest and suggested they head back to the temple. She didn't see the puddle of green blood and totally slipped. Luckily, she didn't fall, because Prince Alois swooped in to save the day again, who also promised to pretend he didn't hear her quietly curse under her breath. After that, he just picked her up to carry her the rest of the way to the temple door. Ignoring her protests, Renabin's face soured again, having to lug those monkeys around while some random dude snatched the saintess. Suddenly, Cassidra popped out of the shelter, blocking their path and demanding to talk to Emiliona. But the saintess needed rest, and besides, she had nothing left to say to the crown prince. She just handed his sword back, gritting her teeth and saying thanks. So, once again, His Highness got dissed by these folks, who immediately headed for the exit. Renella saw the whole thing, just starting to shake off the fear. The next morning, Emiliona woke up feeling refreshed and full of energy. She immediately decided to check her wound since she wasn't feeling any discomfort, and she noticed there wasn't even a scar. She didn't even know she could heal that fast. Then she remembered the monkeys and decided to go check on them. The second she opened the door, she bumped right into Prince Alois, like he was waiting for the perfect moment. Seeing how bright and chipper she was, he was stoked the saint was doing okay. Him being here this early probably explains why Emiliona, half asleep, gave him a room. She also admitted her wound had healed up, and then asked if anything had happened during the night. The prince assured her nothing too serious went down, just that someone had been spreading rumors about them. Looks like people are misinterpreting the nature of their relationship and jumping to conclusions, probably because they saw the prince carrying the saint in his arms. Just then, Renabin came running towards them, looking scared stiff, like he'd seen a ghost, begging for help. Emiliona had never seen him like this before, and started to get a little worried. The high priest couldn't get a word out, and just gestured for her to go to the garden. The place was trashed, like a horde of bandits ripped through it. The priests were sprawled out like corpses, and the Holy One wanted to know what the hell happened. Renabin was standing there, totally spaced out, his face a mask of horror and anger, but he wasn't saying a word. Only when Emiliana yelled louder did he finally bring up the warning about how bringing animals was dangerous. The girl realized that the monkeys had caused this whole mess, and then they showed their faces, looking all smug, like they'd done something super important. But hey, they're monkeys, they want to play around, and when they saw the Holy One, they immediately jumped into her arms. The high priest, totally flustered, started scolding them for hugging the lady without permission, but she turned to the pets herself, asking them to confess if they were behind the destruction. Her face was stern, and the animals felt guilty, but she couldn't stay mad at them for long, and apologized to Renabin on their behalf, which only infuriated him. But realizing there was no changing the saint's mind, he just asked her to be careful. They should really clean up this mess, but Emiliona knew the priests were exhausted and sent them to rest. While she was figuring out what to do with the monkeys, she heard Alois's voice. He immediately grabbed one of the monkeys, asking them to carry it, but he did it so roughly that the animal got scared. The monkey broke free from his grip and immediately jumped back to the saint. The girl got worried about her pets, but the prince asked her to rethink keeping them. After all, they were monsters just recently, and keeping them close isn't the best idea. Emiliona agreed with His Highness, but only to a point. The girl didn't see a big danger from the monkeys, but she understood that their antics could really interfere with the temple's work. These little guys need constant supervision, and the saint's happy to take on that responsibility herself. She let them run wild for a bit, especially since there's barely anything left to break in the garden anyway, and she dedicated her newfound free time to the prince, who wanted a word with her. Over tea, Alois declared he's the kind of guy who'd sacrifice one life to save two, and ain't nothing gonna stop him when it comes down to it. But he's curious what the saint would do in that situation. And Emiliona got to thinking. Then, she proudly admitted she'd probably sacrifice herself to save three. Besides, things could always change if someone really special came into her life. The value of someone like that would have to be comparable to dozens, even hundreds of lives. And His Highness immediately asked who Emiliona would pick as that person. He even admitted that if he were in her shoes, he probably would have sacrificed that special someone. His Highness is sure that person would understand his choice. After talking with Alois, the saint went to lie down, and Renabin reported on how many letters they'd received. People started sending them from everywhere after Emiliona announced she was leaving the empire, right in front of the prince and the nobles. The saint ordered those letters burned. It's obvious high society is scared to deal with monsters without her. Obeying, the high priest started throwing the envelopes into the fire, and while he was doing that, he noticed one letter from the palace, sent by Ewan Perven. That's the last name of all the emperor's kids, except for the crown prince. But Emiliona had never heard that name before. She didn't think His Majesty had any other descendants. She got curious and decided to read the letter. Then she started muttering about how she'd never forgive them if it was true, which totally threw Renabin off. Promising to fill him in later, the saint asked him to get Jessie right away, because they were heading to the palace. That golden letter's got a spell on it, and only the royal family knows that kind of magic. Only the senders can break it, but we don't even know if what it says is true yet. So Emiliana grabbed Renabin, Jessie, and the monkeys, and they're off to check it out. On the way, the saint quickly explained that the letter contained some pretty messed up stuff. But since the message was from the imperial family, Jessie was hoping it was just some sick joke. The scary part is, the details were way too specific, and if the letter's a fake, someone's gonna pay big time. It talked about a human experiment, which could mean serious trouble for the palace. The palace has always done some messed up stuff, so Emiliana wasn't exactly surprised. But the request to save him before she left the empire really got to her. Prince Ewan's letter just wouldn't leave her head, and she was fighting like hell to keep her emotions in check. Arriving at the palace, Renabin immediately started yelling for the saintess to get out of her way. The servants didn't dare disobey, but they were wary seeing what kind of mood she was in. The saintess and her entourage marched forward with purpose, determined to reach their goal as quickly as possible. One of the subjects still asked her to wait, but Emiliona just demanded to know where the emperor was right now. Her tone was so irritated that the servant didn't dare report immediately. But then, stammering, he explained that His Majesty was currently in the backyard. Thanking him for the answer, the girl rushed forward again, almost clipping Bolchan's servant with her shoulder. She'd heard everyone with even a shot at the throne was dead, and it looked like they'd left this kid alive for experiments. The letter says Prince Ewan's mom is an elf, which makes His Highness half-elf. Elves can heal thanks to their strong life force, so the prince probably can too. Now he's just a guinea pig and a walking first aid kit whenever someone in the family gets hurt. According to the letter, the prince can heal any wound, so the palace doesn't need to rely on the temple anymore. But they're experimenting on him because he can't use his powers for a while after healing a serious injury. So there are drawbacks to his ability. Soon, Emiliona arrived where she needed to be, and His Majesty greeted her like nothing was wrong. What's more, he was hoping she was ready to have a normal conversation now. Right off the bat, with an angry look on her face, the saint declared she wasn't putting up with this treatment anymore. The emperor was pissed. First she says she's leaving the empire, and now she doesn't like how he treats her. Looks like Emiliona's words didn't faze him, but she was holding her own for now. And she asked Renabin to summon the priests and holy knights to the palace. His Majesty was seriously ticked off that the saint was giving orders so casually in his palace and demanded an explanation. The girl just told him not to get so worked up about it. But he wouldn't calm down, because this was the ruling family's territory, and she was overstepping. The saint reminded him how he himself sent his knights to the temple, and now she was doing the same. Back then, the emperor also told her not to worry, and now she's returning the favor. His Majesty's rage finally exploded, and he started screaming like a maniac that she didn't dare compare herself to him, and that she had no right to boss anyone around here. But Emiliona was only treating him the way His Majesty treated her. Outsiders aren't allowed to run things in the temple, especially people like the emperor. The king totally lost it and instinctively grabbed for his sword. But Emiliona was already expecting him to do something like that, so she casually snapped her fingers, and the throne behind His Majesty just exploded into splinters. To the stunned emperor, she just explained that her fingers twitched by accident and apologized, but she warned him that if he made her repeat herself again, she'd do something way worse. Then she left Renabin and Jessie there and headed off somewhere else herself. The letter said that Prince Yuan was locked up at the end of the Rose Path by the Scarlet Wall, but the palace grounds are way too big to find the prince with just that one clue. Suddenly, Alois showed up near Emiliona again, and it's unclear how he knew where she'd be, but he pretended he was nearby and just happened to spot her, and then offered his help. Emiliona cut right to the chase, asking if His Highness had seen a boy around 12 years old in the palace. She explained it was a kid with the blood of some fantastical race flowing through his veins. Now, the Saintess was actually glad Alois was here, because this was his chance to prove he could be useful. Realizing they were thinking about the same kid, His Highness agreed to spill the details. Plus, he knows the Rose Path by the Crimson Wall like the back of his hand, and can definitely help the Saintess. The girl thanked him and promised to protect him if things got hairy. His Highness just gave her a charming smile and told her not to make promises like that. He's really happy to help the Saintess and would gladly protect her himself anytime. He was laying it on thick, another line designed to win Emiliona over. He also pointed out that the Saintess is always protecting someone, and there's nothing wrong with being the one who's protected for a change. She knew he was probably full of it, but his words still soothed her heart. Plus, it sounded so romantic, and Emiliona was a sucker for that kind of stuff. They reached the Road of Roses, and the prince warned her that every rose bush was cursed. Even if you cut them down, new ones will grow back and spew poison. Noticing her heels, Alois said they weren't exactly hiking shoes and offered to carry her. Emiliona started to protest, but the prince insisted it was his way of thanking her for saving his people. And just like that, he scooped her up like she weighed nothing. She didn't even get a word in. Then, waving his dagger, Alois cleared a path, slashing thorns as he sped forward. It felt less like a road of roses and more like a path of straight-up horror and trials. Emiliona just looked back, watching the chopped branches fall, writhing like living things. She knew that if they'd just walked in here, things would have gone south real quick. Then Alois asked the saint to close her eyes, because he didn't want her seeing the brutal stuff some of the soldiers were doing. The girl didn't argue, and just buried her face in His Highness's shoulder. All the while, she believed that if those soldiers, created by magic, turned out to be monsters, she could handle them, but she'd have to open her eyes to do it. Right now, though, Alois needed her to stay put, because he was dealing with living corpses. To him, they were just badly decomposed, shriveled-up remains that were crawling and twitching. He even felt a little awkward that the saint had to put up with the stench coming off them. Soon they reached the right spot, and Eloise let Emilione open her eyes. Now they were in a decent-looking clearing, and His Highness set the saint down on the ground. Up ahead, she spotted a building covered in vines. Exactly what she was looking for. Moving closer, Emiliana saw a blonde kid chasing a butterfly and having a blast. His aura was even stronger than the priest's, and she knew it was Prince Yuan. Spotting a strange lady, the boy stopped and stared, surprised. Then he said strangers weren't allowed here, and asked who she was. The saint explained she was invited by His Highness, who was sick, and that's when the kid realized she was the saint. He was stoked Emiliana showed up, because the professor said not to expect an answer. The girl cupped the boy's face and said she couldn't ignore the prince's request. Suddenly, she felt something weird, and it put her on edge. She started channeling divine power into him, and it was soaking right in. His wound must be seriously deep. Then, Emily rolled up the boy's sleeve and noticed his whole arm was covered in bruises. After that, Yuan confessed he wanted to get help from the saintess before she left the empire. And now he was super grateful, because he didn't expect her to answer him so quickly. Next to the saintess, the little prince spotted a man, and she explained that he was her friend. Later, over tea, Yuan admitted that this was the first time anyone had come here at his invitation. Alois got curious and asked if there was anyone else living here besides His Little Highness. The boy told him to just call him by his name, since he didn't think of himself as a prince. Then, he explained that there were actually a lot of people here, and they rotated out every month. He doesn't think of himself as a prince, because the emperor doesn't see him as a person, so he doesn't deserve the title. Alice had to agree with the emperor. The kid wasn't just human. Yuan backed him up, saying that's exactly why they were keeping him locked up here. Seeing the kid get bummed out, Alois corrected himself, saying he thought the prince was gorgeous. He's way more beautiful than a regular person because of how unique he is. And people always want what they can't have. And His Majesty's no different. Alois explained to the kid that the Emperor didn't want to let him go because of his beauty. The little prince's face just got more and more surprised. And he confessed that he really wanted to go outside, at least once. Seeing his guests deep in thought, Yuan figured his wish was way too big. But the saint immediately declared she'd take care of it and bust the little prince out of here. Stroking his blonde hair, she told him to trust her. It was a dream come true for the kid. But he was afraid the scientists would get mad at the saint. With a light chuckle, Emiliona assured him she was way stronger than those scientists and could handle them. The boy was also worried that the Emperor might get angry too. To that, Alois asked Yuan to think about who the real ruler of this world was. And turning towards Emiliona, he proudly declared that it was the saint, because nothing in the whole world was above her, and her power was the greatest. Still, Yuan was worried, believing the sanctuary was under the Emperor's control. Clearly, this kid had been misinformed, and Emiliona was looking forward to teaching him a thing or two. Just then, a crowd of people came out of the palace, looking for the prince. Judging by the crowd, Alois figured getting out of here was going to be a real pain. But the saintess didn't seem too worried, and suggested we make a little chaos. What she meant was, since Princess Aya was here too, they should make a grand exit. The girl walked over to the wall and tugged on one of the vines crawling all over it. The saintess had imbued that vine with divine power, and it started glowing real bright, which then spread down the whole plant, and the branches started to pull apart. Yuan was loving the show, and Alois pointed out that this was just a fraction of the saintess's power. The path back was a lot clearer now, and Alois complimented Emiliona on a job well done. Alois picked up the boy, and an idea popped into his head. Since they still had to meet the Emperor, he didn't want the prince getting freaked out, so he put him to sleep. He used some Eastern sleep suggestion technique and told the saint not to worry, since it's harmless. Emilion really dug that trick and asked Alois to teach her how to do it sometime. His Highness was down for it, especially since they'd have plenty of chances later. Then they headed back, and on the way, the saint was pissed that the Emperor was blocking people from the shrine. And the knights just follow his orders like they don't see anything wrong with it. Alois figured those knights just didn't have a choice, since they'd be punished for disobeying. Sounded reasonable, but Emilion was still not happy about it. She thought it was arrogant towards the chosen of God, and she really understood her people. Because if you don't take that into account, then that person's no good as a leader. She remarked about her companion that his people have a really good master. Alois actually got a little embarrassed that he was just the owner, not someone people would simply worship. Soon, they were back in the part of the garden where the Emperor was, guarded by priests and holy knights. Renabin was relieved the saint finally returned, because the Emperor's screaming was starting to get on his nerves. And when that guy saw the little prince in Alois' arms, he totally flipped out and tried to snatch the kid. But Emiliona blocked him and gave him a look like she was ready to rip his arms off. Renabin jumped in immediately, declaring that His Majesty dared to raise a hand against the saint. Naturally, he started yelling that he wasn't going to touch her. She was just blocking his way. The high priest retorted just as angrily, saying he wouldn't forgive the Emperor if he laid a finger on the saint. Their verbal sparring continued, and then Emiliona herself declared that she wouldn't let His Majesty get away with it if he touched her subjects or priests. The Emperor was losing his mind, screaming like a total scumbag, trying to pin the blame on Emiliona. But she didn't back down, and straight up threatened to get even for the imperial palace invading the sanctuary. Her glare was intense, her voice full of rage, and it actually stung His Majesty that a girl, even a holy one, was talking back. Still, he knew if he lost Yuan, he'd never be able to calm things down. So, he tried to keep his cool and asked Prince Isu to just hand over the kid. Emiliona decided to spin it, claiming the boy just got lost and they found him in the palace. She also made it clear she didn't think it was right to leave a kid like that in a place like this. On top of that, she wasn't about to ask the Emperor's permission. Then she gave him this mysterious smile, and she implied His Majesty knew the boy, which of course he couldn't admit. He just ground his teeth. It pissed him off that the holy woman was holding all the cards, and she even dared to suggest out loud that it was His Majesty's kid. Loud enough for everyone to hear. After that, even the servants were in shock. Almost nobody knew His Majesty had another offspring. People started whispering that the Emperor was hiding his child. Everyone knew he only had the crown prince. Looking guilty, he explained that they kept the child's existence a secret because of an illness, and to fool those who posed a threat to the crown prince. They even needed to deceive the Empire's ally, the shrine, and hide this child from them too. Emilian was furious that the emperor was now making excuses after treating Yuen like dirt, and she declared that since he deceived an ally, he was now his enemy. Stepping almost right up to the emperor, she also declared that she, personally, was not his ally. Then she turned away, and His Majesty just started ranting in anger again. His screams were just bouncing right off Emiliana. She figured he probably thought she was a total airhead anyway, but she reminded him that adults are supposed to take care of kids, and since the emperor wasn't doing that, they were through. The Saintess no longer wanted to see His Majesty face to face, not after the way he'd been treating her. Then she mentioned she was about to bail on the whole empire, and smirked, hoping the emperor was finally happy now. Looks like the word hadn't gotten around yet about the Saintess leaving, and people were freaking out about the future of the empire. Emiliana went on to say that the young prince was physically and mentally drained from some shady experiments, so he was being sent to the sanctuary where he'd be taken care of until he got back on his feet. That was the final straw for the emperor. He even worked up the nerve to try and lunge at the Saintess, but she immediately called for the priests and ordered them to cut down anyone who tried to block her path. His Majesty was powerless to stop her, and Emiliana, Alois, and Yuen left that place for good. Alois couldn't believe someone would lock up a young prince in a castle and use him like that. Meanwhile, Emiliona figured it was time to ask the question that was bugging her. So she straight up asked Alois how he knew Prince Yuen was being held in that place. His Highness didn't want to spill his secret, and hoped the Saintess would understand. This guy probably already realized Emiliona was onto him. Then he suggested that the Saintess should announce again to the people that she's leaving for another country. She didn't argue, and decided to do it next week when the palace throws its big celebration. That's when she'll announce again that she's leaving this empire for good. After getting back to the sanctuary and settling Yuen in, Emiliona got lost in her thoughts. She couldn't stop thinking about her last talk with Alice, and she was even curious about what other countries were like. Renabin told her to really think it over before leaving. But since the shrine isn't tied to any one place, Emiliona wasn't about to change her mind. The high priest got curious about what made the saint make such a choice. The answer was simple. She decided to trust Prince Alois, his convictions, and his ambitions. And because it's her own choice, Emiliona doesn't regret it one bit. To her, this prince was a guy hiding his feelings behind a mask and coming up with 1,000 plans. Plus, he's good at leading others in the right direction. Renabin noticed that the saint had changed, and she didn't deny that she kept getting lost. She herself was curious why she often went down the wrong path. But either way, she won't regret her choice, and she won't be going back to this empire. Girl figured, even if she'd gone down the wrong path, she just had to see it through to grow. After that, the high priest thanked the saint and said he was honored to serve her. A week later, the palace threw a festival, and naturally, it was crawling with nobles. When the saint showed up, they weren't looking down their noses at her anymore. They greeted her properly, gave her compliments, probably hoping she'd change her mind about leaving. Either way, public opinion was now firmly on Emiliona's side. Prince Alois was waiting for her in the hall, and the aristocrats parted as they approached each other. Prince Ace greeted the saint as he should, and she blessed him in return. Then, kissing her hand, the young man asked how her night was, hoping it was peaceful. People who saw this scene started whispering again about how close those two were. Meanwhile, Cassidra asked his father if it wasn't time to send Yuen back where she came from, but the old man figured it made more sense to propose to the Saintess than to tick her off. So when Emiliona approached the emperor, he confessed he had something important to say. Then he glanced at Alois and declared that it was beneath the Saintess to hook up with a prince from another country. Therefore, he decided to propose to her himself, for her to marry Crown Prince Cassidra. Sounds like that was news to the prince himself, and he tried to object, but his father shut him down. After that, he turned back to the Saintess, hoping that this offer would be good enough for her. But Emiliona had no intention of backing down from her decision to leave the empire. She even winked at Prince Alois, wanting him to confirm what she was saying, and to convince everyone, especially the emperor. He gently touched the Saintess's cheek, making it clear she was going with him. Okay, maybe they went a little overboard, but it worked. The emperor stumbled right out of the hall, and he didn't even keep up that whole dignity act he's always pulling with the Saintess. Back at the sanctuary, Emily saw the little prince and asked what he'd been up to. The kid just ran over to hug them, felt like he'd been stuck in his room all day and missed them. The Saintess noticed his wounds were almost healed. He'd be well enough to go outside soon. But first, she asked him to read a few books. The boy was stoked he could finally play in the garden, even if he had to study first. Plus, the saintess guaranteed he was safe now. Hugging His Highness, she also asked him to focus on getting better. Also, she planned to introduce him to someone. He should come to the reception room tomorrow. Alois asked the saint later what her plans were for the little prince. He was sure Emiliona had already figured everything out. Right now, taking care of the kid is her top priority. Then the priests can handle him while she's gone. She knew the responsibility she was taking on, but she's not dumb enough to pass up a chance to move forward. Plus, she picked the country of Asia because she thinks it's a good fit for the common people in this country. Emiliona didn't have the guts to do it alone, so she needed Alois's help. The prince argued that she was still doing a great job keeping corruption in check in the empire. She opened an orphanage in the city and lowered the crazy taxes the nobles were charging regular people. Alice thought all that was a huge accomplishment for the saint, but she felt like she hadn't done much in the year and a half she'd been in the empire. She even suspected her actions did more harm than good, and was too scared to move forward. That's why she needed someone brave and capable, someone who could take the lead and make up for her weaknesses, and she thought Prince Aesi was that guy. By now, Alois had already figured out that he was the person Emilion needed. He held her close and asked if there was any point in waiting, if they needed each other. Meanwhile, Prince Cassidra was absolutely furious about what was happening. It pissed him off that those two not only took you in, but were now mocking the imperial family. His Highness was cursing them out when suddenly there was a knock at his door. Then, with a soft creak, it opened and the head of the young duchess popped in. Ranella, true to form, started chirping at the prince, saying she'd been looking for him everywhere. She admitted she was freaked out when she got to the hall and nobody was there. That's when she noticed the prince's hand was all messed up and screamed like she'd ripped off a fingernail. Then she started grilling him about who did it, suspecting something went down at the party. But Cassidra yanked back his hand that she'd grabbed and explained the saint was about to leave the empire. Ranella was a little surprised, even though she'd heard rumors like that. Then she got super pissed that the saint dared disobey his majesty and hook up with some prince. The duchess figured they needed to head over to the saint right now and stop her from leaving the empire. A sly grin crept across her face as she suggested the prince couldn't just let her walk away. Cassidra thought about it. There was truth in what the young lady was saying. She kept egging him on, saying Emiliona should be at the sanctuary right now. The next day, the saint was tutoring the little prince, helping him read all sorts of fairy tales. The kid was really enjoying it, so she told him he could ask for more books when he was done with those. Just then, Chen practically burst into the room. She was so eager to see the saint. Rushing over and giving her a hug, the little tyke thanked Emilion again for taking such good care of her. And that's when the saint decided to introduce the two kids to each other. When Chen heard that he was a real prince, she got super excited and went over to him. Turns out, the girl was pretty chatty and talkative, but Yuan was a little stunned. Their happy introduction was interrupted by a shout from the crown prince, who stormed into the room. Duchess Ranella followed silently behind him, and Emilion knew they were up to something. Cassidra wanted to have a serious talk with the saint, but he stuttered when he saw Yuan was there. Emiliana hid the kid behind her back and demanded the prince explain why he was back again. He just said that they hadn't finished their conversation at the palace. But the saint didn't buy it. She was pissed that he kept disrespecting her. Plus, he shows up unannounced. The prince countered that the sanctuary doors are open to everyone. Ranella started chiming in, saying His Highness had wasted his valuable time getting there. Still, the saint didn't want to waste her time on a conversation she thought was pointless, and that just pissed His Highness off all over again. But Emiliana wasn't done talking. She declared that the crown prince needed to apologize to her right now. The tension was building, and Chen, noticing the saint was upset, went up to her and tugged on her sleeve. Emiliana realized that the girl was scared and ripped into the prince, saying he was scaring the kids. Her fury unleashed on the uninvited guest again, 'cause she was done dancing to his tune. The prince and duchess were floored. They never expected the saint to act like that. Ranella tried to say Emiliona was going too far, but Emiliona shut her down quick and told her to really think about who was actually crossing the line here. Then she knelt down to the kids and apologized for them having to see such an ugly scene. Ranella wouldn't let it go and kept begging the saint to listen to the crown prince. The girl figured it had to be important, him not being able to wait till the banquet to talk. But whatever it was, she didn't give a damn, which her sneer made perfectly clear. Enraged, Cassidra threatened that he wouldn't just stand by and watch the saint leave the empire. After all, he'd be screwed when Emiliona dipped and left the throne to him. That's why she asked him again to really think about what he already has, and once His Highness gets it, Emiliona will be ready to talk to him. Just then, another guest showed up to see the saintess. Prince Alois. He noticed she had visitors, but she told him not to worry, they were just leaving. So Alois gave a polite greeting to the kids and went to kneel next to Prince Yuyan first. His Highness was super happy the boy looked perkier and was getting better. Turning away, the saintess politely gave Casidru and his girlfriend the boot, pointing out that the priest would show them out. The crown prince wanted to argue, but then he remembered her asking him to think about what allows him to enjoy everything he does, and he stopped dead in his tracks, realizing the mess he'd gotten himself into. Lady Nestra noticed his reaction, but it looks like she wasn't going to accept the situation and was plotting something. So, later on, Renabin was explaining the banquet stuff to the saint, since she wasn't exactly an expert. He only went over the key points, figuring Emilione didn't need to memorize all the details. Honestly, just showing up and gracing the guests with her presence would be enough. Still, Emilione got curious why the sanctuary never threw parties like this before. She knew they had money problems sometimes, but they had a perfectly good hall, right? Turns out, the previous saints just weren't really into banquets. They preferred watching the world quietly from above, and thought banquets were way too loud. Emilione saw it differently. Important decisions could get made at these things, and in her case, she needed to burn an image of the empire into her memory before she left it for good. Just to be sure, Emilione asked Renabin again if he was having second thoughts about leaving with her. He couldn't act any other way, being the high priest and closest to the saint. And his place is the sanctuary, which exists in every country. Saying this, Renabin put his hand to his heart and knelt before the saint, who thanked him for his support. The preparations for the event went smoothly, and soon the day arrived. Emiliona gave her blessing to the people who were welcoming her, and when she opened the hall door, it seemed like she was a little late to the party. Renabin greeted her immediately, and the saint blessed everyone gathered. She also sincerely wished the guests to truly enjoy today's event. The celebration had been going on for a while, but Emiliona started to feel bored at some point. But then she heard a familiar voice. Lady Nestro had unexpectedly shown up. She wasn't alone. His Highness Casidra was next to her, along with Duke Cassian and Prince Alois. The saint blessed them, though the first two were more for show, honestly. Then she asked Renabin to have the servants bring her some wine. The crown prince also wanted some Isios wine, but Emiliona cut him off. She pointed out that Renabin was the high priest, not some servant to run errands for the emperor's son. The priest noticed the saint was getting annoyed and wanted to calm her down a bit. But just then, the servants arrived, and with a furious glare at Casidra, she declared he could ask a servant directly. That tone offended the crown prince, but he tried to keep himself under control. He beckoned a servant over with his fingers and ordered him to bring him Isios. Alois was even surprised that his highness was going to drink that, since Isios is some seriously strong stuff. But that was exactly what the crown prince needed right now, to chill his nerves a bit. Just then, the saint decided to excuse herself from the guests for a moment. But first, she turned to his highness Alois, thanking him for coming today. She was worried he wouldn't be able to make it. Knowing Emiliona was expecting him, Prince Issei was unbelievably happy. He even blushed a little. Suddenly, a suspicious noise came from the direction of Lady Nestro. A broken glass lay next to her. There was a red stain on her dress, and Duke Cassian started fussing over her, worried if she was okay. A servant, his voice trembling, apologized and went to clear everything up immediately. But then Emiliona took his hand. She noticed he'd cut himself on the shards. Then she told him not to worry and used a little divine power to heal his cuts. Then the servant explained he'd tripped and fallen on the broken glass, and the saintess glanced at the holy prince. Last time, the servants accidentally smashed a candy jar too. Probably like before, they'll blame the poor servant for everything and not actually figure out who's responsible. But Emilione actually believed this servant's story. Now, she decided to play things her way and told the guy not to worry about a thing. The saintess walked over to the distressed Lady Nestro, asking how she was, even though it was obvious. Still, Ranella declared that she wasn't hurt, but her expensive dress was now ruined. Surprisingly, the Duchess didn't blame the servant, but instead got the crown prince's attention, complaining about the stain. This actually worked out for Emilione. It'd take the heat off her and Alois. For some reason, Casidra didn't get upset, or start complaining either, and just addressed Lady Nestro. He even promised her a new dress and asked her not to be too hard on the servant. The saint watched them both, barely recognizing the prince, but maybe he was finally listening to her. What's more, the emperor's son actually went up to the servant and asked him how he was doing. Even the servant was in shock. It was like this dude had been replaced by an imposter. Meanwhile, Alice didn't miss the chance to lean in close to the saint. He was curious too about Kasira's change. Then, Emiliona turned her attention back to the young duchess's suffering face and told her not to worry, because another dress would be prepared for her immediately. She also noticed that Duke Cassian's sleeve had been damaged and offered that he join them. The three of them headed towards the guest room, when suddenly, Renelle got another bright idea. Pretending to be an innocent little lamb, she stammered that she didn't want to be a burden at the saint's celebration and was about to leave. Duke Cassian was about to argue, but Emiliona jumped in, and, soothing the Duchess, she told her she could leave the event if that's what she wanted. Thanking the saint for her kindness, Lady Nestro quickly beelined for the exit. Cassian, though, got curious why Emiliona was bothering with this. It's servant work, but she couldn't just stand by. Her precious guests were hurt. Besides, priests aren't her servants. It even made her wonder what the Duke did think priests were. So he explained that these people dedicate their lives to serving God and the saint. Plus, they help nobles and common folk. Out of nowhere, Emiliona told him to shut it. He was talking pretty loud, and Lady Nestro, who hadn't gotten far, overheard him. He didn't get what was up, and figured he must have said something wrong. Emiliana realized the Duke had never actually considered how priests sacrifice their power to help others. She reminded him that caring for the common folk is also the duty of the nobility. Realizing he'd really put his foot in it, the Duke bowed low and apologized to the saintess, even though she hadn't demanded an apology, since most nobles think that way anyway. But Cassian insisted on apologizing, admitting he'd been short-sighted. Then he asked to say something else, and brought up that chandelier incident, when he failed to protect her. And he swore that from now on, even if Ranella was nearby, he'd put the saintess's safety first. Later, Duke Cassian was changed into another suit, which fit his figure perfectly, and he apologized again for causing trouble. But Emiliana was getting a little tired of the constant apologies. She told him to stop, and Anasis apologized again, making the saintess wince without realizing it. Then she found out that even though Lady Nestro was gone, Prince Cassidra was sticking around as the Duke. Plus, he didn't think the Crown Prince was going to bail on the party anytime soon either. Remember how he treated that wounded servant? Looks like he really is taking the saint's advice, which means His Highness is desperately trying to keep her here. And Emiliona realized all this kindness was just an act, just to get her to change her mind. Back in the ballroom, she spotted His Highness chatting with Princess Aya. Seemed like they were having a nice conversation, so the saint decided to go over. She told the Duke to go entertain himself and headed towards the guests. When Prince Alois saw her, he was immediately stoked she was finally back. His face lit up like a Christmas tree. Besides, he didn't think she was late at all. The party can go on as long as the hostess wants it to. Emiliona couldn't argue with that, but she noticed the music had stopped, though she wasn't sure why. Leaning in close, Alois explained that even the music gods were holding their breath because of her beauty. His face was so close to hers that she blushed a little, but the guy was just giving in to his feelings, especially since rumors about them were already flying. He was right. The saint noticed again how people were whispering and staring at them, and only the Crown Prince wasn't thrilled about it. His anger was starting to bubble over. Just then, a lady burning with curiosity approached the pair, and, after gathering her courage, she asked what the relationship was between Emiliona and Alois. The saint herself thought it was rude to discuss her relationship with the prince with someone, especially in front of so many guests. Alois showed up to save the day, telling the lady to fire away with her questions at him. Cassidra smirked, saying Prince Essie was clearly obsessed with protecting the saintess. For a split second, the tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Then, Emiliona chimed in, reminding everyone that the Crown Prince had just protected her himself. And Alois jumped in again, assuring her that he genuinely wanted to serve and protect the saintess, especially since a prince like him was more than enough to keep Saintess Emiliona safe. His words were flattering to her, but they stung the Crown Prince, making him snarl like a rabid dog. Ignoring his anger, Alois kissed the saintess's hand and started chirping around her again. Then he thanked Cassidra, saying he was super happy he got to fulfill his dream, all thanks to him. He was totally messing with His Highness, and judging by his reaction, he was doing a damn good job of it. Later, Emilian sat in her room with a glass of wine, thinking about how much fun she'd had today. Too bad becoming a saint means she can't even get buzzed. But damn, she wanted to get a little tipsy tonight. Just as she brought the glass to her lips, some young dude walked up to her. Green hair, and he introduced himself as Ezua Kerven, son of a count. Hearing that name, the girl racked her brain, and a guy with the same name popped into her head. But the dude standing in front of her was definitely not the same guy she knew. Claiming it was messed up to use someone else's name, she demanded to know who he really was. The young count looked totally baffled, face all twisted with confusion, and insisted he was Ezua. What's more, he swore he was the same Ezua that Emilion rejected way back when. Then, he confessed he went to some mage in the east to get his appearance changed. Figuring this dude had some serious body image issues, the saint asked him what was bugging him. The guy hesitated, clearly embarrassed to admit it. But he finally confessed that he wanted to change so he wouldn't embarrass her. The girl froze. Looks like she's got another fanatic on her hands, one who wants to become handsome just because she rejected him, and now he's hoping for a second chance. Dropping to his knees in front of Emiliona, Ezua looked at her like a loyal puppy and begged her to go out with him. Totally flustered, the saint tried to explain that her rejection wasn't about his looks, but he kept repeating that he could become as handsome as all the guys constantly hitting on her. And now he's saying he won't budge until she accepts his feelings. Emiliona's head started pounding. She just didn't get why some people were so thick-headed. And to end this pointless conversation, she decided to walk away if he liked sitting on the floor so much. But then something weird and terrible happened. She caught him out of the corner of her eye, reaching for her. She didn't have time to react, because the dude was surprisingly quick. He grabbed her hands, pulled her down to the floor, and loomed over her with this crazy look on his face, practically drooling. The guy was demanding an explanation why the saintess wouldn't accept him, even after he became so handsome. In that moment, he was so disgusting to her, and she knew she'd been right to reject him. This moron still thought the saintess rejected him because he wasn't good-looking enough. And Emiliona explained that a person's true beauty lies within, and she liked that shy Ezu a lot more than the man he'd become now. The green-haired guy broke down crying like a baby, not believing a word the saintess was saying. And wouldn't you know it, Prince Alois walks in on this touching moment. He was just there to visit Emiliona. Of course, he completely loses it that some idiot dared to touch the holy woman, and on top of that, knocked her to the floor. Grabbing the scumbag by the collar, he starts laying into him, his eyes burning a hole right through the back of his head. Blind with rage, Alois shoves the punk to the floor, and he goes tumbling head over heels across the room. Ezua starts whining again, about how he made himself beautiful, all so the holy woman would fall for him. The prince might have understood, but the guest's disgusting behavior was really pushing him over the edge. Emiliona finally stops him, her head throbbing even worse because of their fight. She needed to calm this fanatic down somehow, so she asks him what he liked about her the first time they met. According to him, Emiliona, unlike the other ladies, looked at him with bright eyes and a genuine smile. She was like a beautiful rose standing out amongst a bunch of ugly weed buds, and in that moment, Ezua knew his heart belonged only to her. But damn, he screwed it up. She realized that in the past, she hadn't judged Ezua solely on his looks, but that was also the reason she didn't reject him back then. This situation just got super awkward, and the count's son apologized to the saintess for his actions. Soon enough, that guy bolted from the sanctuary, and a while later, Emiliona met with Prince Alois. They decided to have a little romantic date under the starry sky, bathed in moonlight, and also catch up on some stuff that's been piling up. The saintess couldn't get Ezua out of her head, and she repeated that she didn't reject him because of his appearance. His Highness didn't disagree, but he was sure she chose him because of his good looks. And he's also sure that in the future, there will be guys trying to get close to her by using their charm. He asked the saintess to leave these fanatics to him and not deal with them herself. Emiliona agreed, and they spent the rest of the evening in a nice, romantic mood. That same evening, Prince Cassidra met with Duchess Ronella and told her he'd visited the saintess, just like she asked. Lady Nestro herself was amazed at how closely Emiliona and Alois were connected, but the prince was more worried that he hadn't been able to ask her to stay in the empire. Ronella now considered him useless, especially since Eswa, the guy she sent, had also failed. She never thought she'd be so concerned about the saintess leaving the empire. She remembered the Marquis's son giving her the holy book she'd requested as a sign of his feelings. The reason she wanted that book was because it contained information on how to get rid of a saintess. There's a poison found in certain magical creatures that even a saintess can only slowly neutralize. Ronella cooked up a way to seal away the saint, which is why she sent those monsters after her a bunch of times. But Emiliona, on the other hand, was protecting the Duchess from them, even tamed the creatures that attacked her. That's when everything went sideways. This saint's way stronger than the ones before, and she could expose Ranella. That made Lady Nestro think that she's the one who can help her reach her ultimate goal. Another sinister plan popped into her head, and she asked His Highness to hear her out. Ranella's gonna secretly follow Emiliona and try to convince her to come back to the Empire herself. It might sound risky, but she told the prince not to sweat it. And if things get really hairy, Lady Nestro will ask the saint herself for help. And if the princess proves her loyalty by heading overseas, this could totally work. Time to hit the road, and everyone from the sanctuary came out to see Emiliona off. Just to be safe, the saint had Jessie run through her instructions again. And like reciting the Lord's Prayer, she repeated that she had to take care of Prince Yu and the little monkeys. Tears were practically streaming down her face because the saint was leaving, but the saint told her not to be sad. The priests holding the monkeys looked totally bummed out about the saint leaving, but everyone knew she had to go, and Emiliona hurried Renaben because it was time to leave. As they were getting into the carriage, Jessie begged them not to forget them and to come back soon. As a final goodbye, the saint waved and told everyone to hold down the fort until she got back. Back at the docks, Ranella was a little bummed that her cousin was leaving. Even though he swore they'd have tons of chances to hang out, Lady Nestro was still a little salty. The crown prince walked up and asked when Emiliona was supposed to arrive. They reported to him that the saintess would arrive any minute now. And no sooner had Prince Eloise said it than they saw her carriage approaching. Cassidre even felt a pang of sadness, knowing that Emiliona was really leaving the Empire. But Ranella just smirked subtly, pleased with her performance and plotting her next move. Taking the crown prince's arm, she told him not to be too upset, since the saintess would be back soon. But for some reason, her touch made him uncomfortable, and he abruptly pulled his hand away. Lady Nestro understood that he couldn't keep that woman, and now he was taking his anger out on her. The saintess's carriage pulled closer and stopped, and Renaben was the first to step out. After that, he offered Emiliona his hand to help her out, and she politely thanked him. Prince Alois immediately approached her and greeted her with a sweet, genuine smile. So the saintess sees this whole crowd waiting for her, and she thanks them for sticking around. Alois was stoked. The dude gets to escort Emiliona back to his kingdom. Ranella was faking the waterworks. She was even ready to pull a snot rocket with her hanky. But the saintess told her not to get so bummed out. She's just going to another country, not kicking the bucket. And she noticed the Duchess bawling, while the crown prince was just standing there like a tree stump, not even trying to comfort her. Only after she was done talking to Ranella, he dryly asked when the saintess planned on coming back to the Empire. The girl couldn't give him a straight answer. Plus, it was time to get ready to board the ship. Before leaving, she thanked Prince Cassidru for looking out for the servants at the banquet. That sounded like a jab, but the prince just blushed and told the saintess to take care, and that everyone would be waiting for her to return. Emiliona's final farewell was to bless everyone who came to see her off. Even from the deck, she told Lady Nestra to take care of herself, promising the time would fly by and they'd see each other again soon. Well wishes echoed from the pier, and Cassidra even yelled that the saint had to come back. Once the ship was further from shore, the crown prince reminded the Duchess it was time for her next move. The girl was totally ready to chase after Emiliona and bring her back. The saint went down to her cabin and was instantly impressed. Since her escorts didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, they really went all out to make her stay on the ship pleasant. The girl sat down on the plush berth and invited the high priest to sit next to her. He wasn't expecting that, but the saint wanted him to feel how comfy the bed was too. Parking his butt down there, Renaben agreed that it was pretty damn comfortable. But then Emiliona noticed Alois's downturned lips and realized he was jealous. After that, she reassured him it was dumb to be jealous of the high priest, since protecting her was his main job. The saint's words worked, and the prince invited her for a walk on deck to get some fresh air. She thought it was a good idea and started getting ready, but now Renaben was sitting there with a sour look on his face. Later, admiring the vast expanse of the sea, Alois suggested showing Emilione another country before they arrived. The girl was down, and the prince explained briefly that it was a country where beauty goes hand in hand with luxury. He was sure the saint would love it, and she felt a tingle of anticipation. Truth be told, she didn't really get why they were stopping in other countries along the way, and figured Alois was up to something. At first, the voyage seemed amazing, but pretty soon, Emiliona was experiencing the full glory of seasickness and was lying there barely alive. The prince comforted her as best he could, and his soothing words helped the saint feel a little better. Alice was almost proud. It's not every day you see a saint looking so vulnerable. But Emilion didn't think his last words came from a good place. The prince felt her forehead, checking for a fever. Everything was fine, so he told her to get some sleep, let her stomach settle. He wasn't in a hurry to pull his hand away, and started stroking her forehead, hoping she'd fall asleep faster. And she remembered doing the same thing to Yuan, patting his head to get him to sleep. The prince figured the saint needed some tenderness right now. He leaned in close and asked if he could ask her something. He didn't think Emilion always had to be strong to be a saint. As he said that, he started massaging her neck, which helped her relax and drift off. At first, she felt awkward and helpless, but then she gave in to the prince's care. It's been 4 days since we set sail, but Emiliona still can't shake this seasickness. Even a walk in the fresh air doesn't help. And Reneben's worried about how pale she looks. But the saint asked him not to worry, saying they'll arrive soon, and she'll feel fine again. Alois came up to them, excited to announce they'll be docking at the Veymonte Kingdom any minute. This is the place he was talking about, and he repeated that its capital is unbelievably beautiful. However, the saint didn't care about the city's pretty streets right now. She just wanted to get on dry land as soon as possible. The prince even felt embarrassed, because he promised a comfortable trip and his efforts flopped. But he promised Emiliona would be the first one off the ship, since traditionally, the highest-ranking person does that. While they chatted a little longer, a sailor informed His Highness that they had arrived at the Veymonte Kingdom. Alois offered his hand to Emilione, asking if he could escort her. Reaching the shore, the girl was overjoyed the seasickness was over. She could have kissed the ground. But then she noticed a crowd of people waiting to greet her, whispering about her appearance and status. First to approach the saint was the local king, Eusebio Veymonte, a short guy whose crown was way too big for his head. Emilione greeted him politely and wished him God's blessing. She learned that orphanages were also opening in this kingdom, but she couldn't help but notice the king's excessive jewelry. So, her first impression wasn't great. It seemed like luxury had gone too far here. Selling the jewels from just one of the king's outfits could feed 100 poor people for a week. Next, Prince Alois greeted the king and complimented him on his appearance. Eusebio recognized the Prince of Ace and remarked that the guy was much more slender than he'd expected. Glancing at the guy in the robe, the king figured he was the high priest. He introduced himself as Reneben, bowed low to his majesty, and bowed again. The king took it as a good sign for their country that both a saint and the high priest had arrived. But Reneben eyed his massive crown and the rings covering almost every finger, and suggested he'd be better off paying an alchemist with those jewels if he wanted to attract good energy. But the king meant the country would flourish because they'd been blessed with divine grace. Reneben shot back that the country's prosperity depended entirely on the king's own efforts. Realizing arguing was pointless, Eusebio offered the saint a carriage almost entirely decorated with gold. However, Emiliona wanted to travel separately from the king, even though he explained his carriage was spacious and could easily fit all the arriving guests. The saint asked His Majesty not to worry about it, saying his carriage was way too fancy for her. So when he pointed to a simpler wagon, Emilion said she wanted to ride in that one. She figured it'd be more comfortable for her and whoever she was bringing along. Eusebio was floored, not understanding why the saint would pick such a beat-up ride, like it was embarrassing him personally. He begged her to ride with him in the main carriage, but she straight up told him she didn't want to ride with His Majesty. Then, giving him a stern look, she hoped she wouldn't have to say it again. That seemed to bum the king out, but he still made sure a separate carriage was ready for the guests. And the saint headed straight for it, saying they'd meet at the capital gates. On the way, Reneben kept marveling at how ridiculously luxurious everything was. Not just the king's clothes, but even the carriages. Emilion noticed the over-the-top extravagance too, and asked Eloise what he wasn't telling her. She figured he was leaving out some seriously crucial stuff about this kingdom. But the prince wouldn't give her a straight answer, just told her to wait and see what happens. Reneben, for one, was thinking the kingdom wasn't all that loaded. But where's all the money going? The saintess was wondering the same thing, 'cause the king and the nobles are decked out in bling. Something's definitely up, and Emiliona was giving Alois the big question mark eyes again. With this sly grin on his face, the prince said it wouldn't be any fun if he just spilled the beans. Only, the saintess wasn't in the mood for games right now, and she was starting to get pissed. But the prince promised that if he revealed the secrets of the Veymonte Kingdom, she wouldn't see his true self. He wants the saintess to see for herself what's really going on with this country. And then, gently touching her cheek, the prince told her not to get so worked up, or she'd get wrinkles. They finally got to the palace, and the high priest and the saint were just gaping. They'd never seen a building dripping with so much gold before. Emiliona was checking it all out, totally impressed. It really looked like the ultimate in luxury. Me, the narrator? I'm getting a vibe this is all just a facade, like the Emerald City. Let's see what's really going on. The king came up behind Emiliona and asked if she liked their palace. They really went all out for the saint's visit. Then he suggested heading to the dining hall, but the high priest pointed out she was still seasick. He suggested she be taken to her chambers first, so she could get some rest. The king agreed, but the high priest's rooms weren't ready yet because the servants messed up. So, he suggested Renabin stay at the temple until his rooms were prepared. That hit Renabin like a slap in the face, and he wanted to argue, but the saint stopped him and asked if everything was ready for her and Prince Alice to relax. Stretching that smile across his plump, wrinkled face again, Eusebio admitted everything was prepped and ready to go. Hearing that, Emiliona declared that Renabin didn't need to stick around the temple, since he could take the chambers that were meant for her. The high priest was super embarrassed. He couldn't just take the saint's spot, but the king was more curious about where Lady Emiliona planned on sleeping. Prince Alois answered for her, suggesting she share his room, if the saint was okay with it. The girl agreed with his idea and suggested they go unpack their stuff. With that, they headed off to the palace, and the king tried his best to hide how ticked off he was. First, he wanted to teach that high priest a lesson, and now even the saintess herself seemed way too stuck up. Renabin was still freaking out, even after they were inside, about having to take over Emiliona's room. But she reassured him they'd be living there together, which just made him even more anxious. Same with the prince, who thought they'd agreed to stay in his room. On top of that, Alice would have to explain the situation to everyone who thought he and Emiliona were an item. Then she realized this could start some nasty rumors, since she and Renabin already spent so much time together. By this point, they reached the prince's room, and the maid announced that everything was ready for them to move in. Alois headed for the door first, while Renabin kept asking the saintess what they should do. That's when she had a brilliant idea. She'd sleep alone, and Renabin would bunk with Alois. The high priest was relieved the saintess wouldn't be with the prince, but the prince felt pretty awkward. Hoping they wouldn't start fighting, Emiliana headed to her room, but the prince stopped her. He moved in close, leaning down like he was about to plant one on her. The girl was stunned, actually thinking he was going to kiss her, but then he plucked a feather from her hair that had somehow gotten stuck there. Still, she blushed. She felt foolish for even letting that thought cross her mind, and thanked him for his kindness. After that, His Highness left. But Emiliana knew something was up. This guy's definitely playing games with her, and that whole feather thing was probably staged. And while she was lost in thought, Alois glanced back at her every so often as he walked away. Later, the saint was brought a luxurious fur coat and other outfits fit for a queen. The prince, who came to invite her to the dining hall, commented that the fur coat looked too bulky on her. Emiliana ripped it off, totally ticked, but she pointed out this kingdom's all about beauty and luxury mixed together. Alice wasn't backing down from what he said, but he thought the kingdom felt even weirder since he'd been gone. All these clothes might look good, but the saint felt like she was carrying a ton of bricks. Then, out of nowhere, she caught a nasty whiff and got super alert. The smell was creeping into the room through a window that wasn't shut all the way, and the noise starting to drift in from the street told Emiliana there might be monsters outside. Peeking out the window, the girl saw the sky change color real fast, like everything was getting choked by some creepy fog. She didn't spot any actual monsters, and the saint figured it was some kind of prophecy for her. The sky went back to blue again, and Emiliana got real curious about what this kingdom was hiding. On his way to the dining hall, Alois noticed his companion was lost in thought. She smiled a little and fibbed, said she was thinking about their future, and still couldn't believe he'd chosen her. But he thought she was the most gorgeous woman he'd ever laid eyes on. He felt like he'd finally found what he was looking for, and Emiliona thanked him for the sweet words. Then she asked the prince if he remembered that time she confessed she wanted to be acknowledged by her man. That moment was burned into Alois's memory, and he remembers it crystal clear even now. And now the saint asked him not to make her wait too long for that dream to come true. His Highness gently kissed his fiancée's hand and assured her she'd find out everything very soon. The royal family was already in the dining hall, waiting only for the foreign guests. Eusebio tried to keep his cool, but he couldn't shake the resentment over the saint's behavior. And when they announced the guests had arrived, he snapped at the kids to stand up immediately as a sign of respect. He kept it polite, greeting the saintess and the prince at dinner. The king even stood up himself, pulled out a fancy chair for her, showing her where to sit. She appreciated his etiquette and thanked him, then turned to Renaben, complimenting his work. The king jumped into the convo, wanting to ask Emilione a question he didn't get to last time. The girl paused for a second, while the servant poured her wine. Then, after taking a sip, she made it clear she wanted quiet at the table, hinting that the king should shut it. That definitely ticked off Eusebio, but he didn't argue. But his daughter immediately asked the saintess if she could ask her a question, and Emilion gave her the floor. She didn't want to talk to the king himself, but these little prince and princess are pretty cute, unlike him. And the girl wondered why the saintess had left the empire. For a kid her age, it was a weird question, but the saint just said she wanted to see other countries, that's all. Then they started asking if she was going to stay with Isi forever, along with Prince Alois. And the saint politely explained to the little rugrats again that she'd be going back home after a while. She was kind of hoping that was the last question for the day, because it seemed like the kids were asked to ask these things by the king, figuring the saint wouldn't refuse them. Once the little guys quieted down, Eusebio asked Prince Alois for a small favor. He was super curious if His Highness had any young and beautiful princesses as sisters. The saint and the prince gave each other meaningful looks at that question. But it was obvious the fat old geezer was looking for himself a wife to become the Queen of Vermonte. And so the guests wouldn't think badly of him, Eusebio explained, with a sad face that the queen had passed away 3 months ago. Now he's on the hunt for a new wife, one just as gorgeous as his late queen. But the saintess decided to give this old fart a crash course in morality. She threw his own words back at him, reminding him his wife's only been gone 3 months. Then, with a look of disgust, she shamed him for wanting another wife so soon, especially one young enough to be his daughter. Eusebio clearly didn't know the meaning of shame, 'cause he blew a gasket, face turning red with rage at the saintess's harsh words. Saintly or not, he wouldn't let anyone talk to him like that, and that's when Renaben jumped in. Ready to defend Emiliona, he was gonna let the king have it, but the girl told him to chill. She declared it was pointless to argue with someone so reckless. Glancing at the king, the saintess guessed he wasn't too worried about divine punishment. Of course, she was just messing with him, and Eusebio immediately apologized for losing his temper. He acted like the warning about punishment was for someone else entirely. Now he was trying to look all innocent and cuddly to the saint. But Emiliona wasn't buying his act. She warned him that if he disrespected her group again, he'd face some seriously nasty consequences. His Majesty had nothing to say to that, and he tried to keep his head down for the rest of dinner. Prince Alois was quietly stoked that his future wife had so smoothly put the king in his place. Later, heading to the lounge, His Highness asked the saint if she enjoyed the meal. The girl liked everything, although the dessert struck her as a little too sweet. Alois liked her assessment, because the chef was his spy, whom he'd planted here 6 years ago. Emiliona didn't quite understand, and then the prince announced that the food she ate was poisoned. For a moment, she was bummed, thinking her fiancé had gone nuts, and decided to poison her. But it turned out it was poison that didn't affect her. This stuff barely works on regular dudes, and only after months of use. Plus, it's for the king. Still, Emiliona was bummed and warned him she doesn't dig guys with secrets. The prince wasn't planning on hiding anything from the saint, or he wouldn't have brought it up at all. And he explained the first sign of the poison is losing your sense of taste. But by then it's game over. Now, Emiliona thought Alois's confession about killing the royal family was way too bold. He justified it by saying the only way a foreign prince can off a king is with poison. But the saint was pissed he might hurt kids, and without a good explanation, she's ready to punish him. Alice didn't want the kids to get hurt and wanted to find another way, which is why he brought the saint here. Realizing his target was just the king, Emiliona asked him why, but the prince figured 1,000 words wouldn't cover it, and it'd be better if she saw it for herself. But we can only do this if she's ready to face the truth about what's going down in this country. The girl swore she's tougher than she looks and can handle any kind of horror. Besides, she sees the prince doesn't think that way either, or he wouldn't have brought up the engagement. But at the same time, he's treating her like some little kid who needs protecting. Alois apologized, all sheepish, saying he just thought Emiliona wasn't ready to face this kingdom's reality. Plus, he's convinced the saint can't stay indifferent to the suffering of innocent people. What's more, His Highness was probably the one who wasn't ready, and he was scared his bride would suffer when she saw the whole truth. A little later, Emiliona went to see the high priest, who was chilling by the fireplace reading, but he got a bad feeling about the saint showing up so late and asked what was wrong. The girl confessed she was being tormented by a question she couldn't answer for hours. and she asked for advice on how much time it would take to prepare to face something. The high priest didn't understand what kind of preparation she was talking about. Then Emiliona relayed Prince Alois's words, that she should be ready to learn the truth about the kingdom. For some reason, this upset Renabin. He figured His Highness thought the saint's heart was weak. Like he didn't see the courage she showed when she stood up to the emperor himself. Her outburst of indignation even made Emiliona laugh. But now the high priest himself felt awkward, and his face flushed crimson again. Then the saint confessed she was going to personally check out the situation in the kingdom tomorrow and see everything with her own eyes. What's more, she invited Renabin to go with her. The next morning, they told the king they were heading to the temple, but he wanted them to stay at the palace longer. Emiliona didn't get why he was objecting. There's nothing weird about a saint visiting a temple, right? And when Eusebio confessed he wanted to talk to her, she told him to wait as long as it took. Then she took Prince Alois by the arm and suggested they get moving. His Highness just gave the king a respectful bow as they left, but the king still wasn't happy. He warned the prince to make damn sure he brought the saint back to the palace. It sounded like a threat from a well-meaning but stern dad, which the prince found amusing, so he promised. Later, as they rode in the carriage, Emiliona asked Alois how he could smile so easily at the king. She wouldn't be able to do that, not even if she gave it her all. His Highness explained that he didn't have the saint's high status, so he had to be good at hiding his feelings. Then he admitted, kind of flirtatiously, that he couldn't pull it off when he first met Emiliona. Remembering how he got her attention the first time, the saint suspected he'd used Marquise Chevalier. The trick was actually a sweet scent, so faint only a saint could pick it up. He grabbed a strand of her hair and started sniffing it, like the scent was still there. The first time they met, the prince denied smelling sweet, and Emiliona asked him why. Their conversation had turned into such mush that the high priest couldn't take it anymore, but he masked his jealousy with suspicions that Prince Alois had approached the saint with ulterior motives. His Highness chuckled and assured them he wasn't going to do anything bad to Emiliona. On the contrary, he wanted to show her that to create the world she dreamed of, she needed someone like him. Seeing how things were going, Emiliona asked Renabin to calm down. Anyway, things are going pretty smooth right now, so no need to sweat it. The high priest didn't have any objections, as long as the saintess was happy. The girl was about to smile back at him when she felt something rising in her throat. Her face turned sickly, and the sudden mood swing freaked the guys out. Emiliona clutched her throat and croaked that she couldn't breathe, like something was crushing her. The explanation for this was that the saintess could feel the cries of the Vaimont people. Now she was starting to understand why Alois brought her here, and she tried to pull herself together. The high priest was fussing over her, ready to help at a moment's notice. But then the carriage stopped, and His Highness announced they had arrived at the slums. They waited another minute for the saintess to catch her breath. After that, she was ready to step outside and see all the horror the prince had warned her about. Outside, the high priest was the first one thrown for a loop. It looked like they'd stumbled into hell. The dirty street was lined with dilapidated shacks, and people were practically lying next to them, so skinny you could study their bones. The very air seemed thick with pain and suffering, and it gave you the absolute worst feeling. Spotting some people who actually looked healthy, a little girl started walking towards them, but her legs were so thin and weak, she barely took a few steps before she started to collapse. The saint managed to catch her, and she felt a surge of anger that anyone would do this to a kid. The girl lifted her head and looked at the saint with sunken eyes, trying to say something. Her voice was really weak too, but she managed to ask if the woman was Sister Libera. Emiliona explained that the girl was mistaken, and that she was actually from the temple. It broke her heart to see that wasted, collapsing body, so she used her divine power to make the girl feel better. The bruises and scrapes showing under her tattered old clothes started to disappear. The kid's complexion got healthier too, and she felt a surge of energy. Realizing that this woman had healed her, the little girl thanked her sincerely. Then she asked Alois and Renabin to gather all these poor victims in one place, and they needed to do it ASAP. Emiliona worked with those people for a whole week, barely getting any rest herself. The fatigue was obvious, and the prince, worried, started begging her to get some real rest. But the saint couldn't ignore the sick people. There were still so many outside. She told Alois to cut the chatter and help bring them to her for treatment. Emilione figured she'd relax after she healed her last patient, but then her vision started to blur, and she felt like she was about to stumble and faceplant. The last thing she saw was Prince Issei lunging towards her, trying to catch her, and then she felt herself falling into some kind of empty void. Nothing but nothingness, The prince managed to grab her and was about to carry her to the cot. Renabin heard his shout and immediately burst into the tent, knowing something was up with the saintess. Soon the girl came to and told them to stop fussing, saying she just got a little dizzy. But the prince and high priest weren't buying it and insisted the saintess get some serious rest before continuing the healing. Emilione was eager to know when the priests from the kingdom of Vimonte would arrive. Renabin figured they were held up on their way to the slums because of the entry ban, but was sure they'd be here soon. After that, the saint finally agreed to get some rest. Meanwhile, somewhere in the woods, guys in robes were sitting around a campfire, plotting how to take out the saint while she was still in the slums. One of them doubted they could pull it off, since she had divine protection. But then one guy told them about a method that was guaranteed to work. What these dudes found even weirder was that he'd ordered the killings to stop, and he'd been acting strange ever since meeting the saint. Because of that, they had to act even faster to get the guy back to normal. From behind them, out of the darkness of the forest, a voice announced that the guy was his sister. It was Verone, who figured out some dark mage was trying to mess with the saint. The hooded guys weren't expecting Duke Nestro, but he was in their way, and they decided to deal with him right then and there. But Verone was already ready to punish those who worshipped darkness, preparing to unleash the light of retribution. A huge flash went off where the villains were, but they teleported out just in time. Veorn stared at the chunks of rock where those filthy rats had been sitting, and he had a plan brewing. Later that night, Emilia was sound asleep in one of the huts, lit by candlelight. Prince Alois stayed right by her bedside, watching her breathing. Suddenly, he heard his cousin's voice. He'd come in so quietly, the prince got chills from the surprise. Turning around, he saw Veorn leaning against the doorframe. He asked what he was even doing in the Vimont kingdom, and it turned out the duke had something to deliver. He pulled out an ancient locket, round and hanging from a long chain. It was an artifact that Prince Alois himself had asked him to get a while back. Taking the item, Alois praised Veorn as the best mage in the whole empire. This thing'll be a huge help to the saintess. But his praise sounded kind of fake to the duke, and he got curious why the saintess looked so wiped out. She wasn't even listening to them. When he found out she'd been healing the sick for a whole week, the duke wasn't surprised. She always took on stuff like that. Then, he quietly told the prince that dark mages were trying to take out the girl. It also struck him as weird that Ranella was acting like she was about to bail. He didn't know why, but he noticed his sister started tailing Eloise and Emilione right after they left the capital, so he told the prince to be on his guard. Either way, he wasn't going anywhere and was ready to protect the saintess at any moment. He planned to deal with his sister later, but Alois told Verone to go back and not worry. Now he's got the artifact, and since he's here, he's sure no one can hurt the saintess anymore. After a while, Emiliona woke up and went right back to healing the sick. They were all lying on blankets on the floor, so she had to kneel over them. Renabin kept asking how she was doing, and every time she swore she was fine. But it should be easier for her now, since the priests from Vimonte finally arrived. She wasn't exactly thrilled to see them, though, seeing as how long it took them to get here. She didn't even want to hear their excuses. But they couldn't really say anything else to defend themselves. Then Alois showed up, letting her know the carriage was ready for the trip to the temple. Renabin told her to leave without worry, and promised he'd sort everything out here with the priests. That put Emiliona at ease. She could count on the high priest, and told him not to stay behind too long. On the way, the prince admitted he'd been using the saint's name for stuff, but it wasn't for bad stuff. Emiliona felt a wave of relief wash over her. At first, she thought it would never end, but now she's happy to see so many people healed. Turns out, all these people are just a small fraction of the kingdom's whole population. Then Alois pulled out some documents, and the saint tensed up. The prince had been waiting a long time to show her this, but he figured now was the right moment. Emiliona read the papers carefully for a while, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The thing is, the people of Vimonte have been getting screwed over by the king and the nobles' lavish lifestyles. The priests tried to protect the people, standing up to the king, but they just weren't strong enough. Eventually, they managed to protect half the people in the temple, under the condition that His Majesty wouldn't interfere. But those who weren't sheltered by the temple were brutally exploited, forced to work on pointless construction projects and mine precious stones. This whole thing was just for the king and nobles' vanity, and under the guise of overseeing the work, the people were abused. Villages near the mines turned into slums, and priests were restricted from even going there. Emiliona just couldn't wrap her head around how horrors like this could happen on land where the temple stood. So she decided that tonight, in the name of the Holy Maiden, there would be a trial. a trial for King Vamante, and when he was brought into the hall, the saint demanded he confess his guilt, that for his own personal gain, and not for the good of the country, he violently exploited the people. Eusebio stood silent, head bowed, like he had nothing to say for himself, and when Emiliona demanded an answer again, he angrily declared that it wasn't his fault. He pretended that he was just now hearing about the horrors happening on the land where the temple is. Seeing that this guy wasn't going to crack, Emiliona asked Eloise to hand her those documents. Then she asked the king if he knew anything about these papers. Eusebion's face instantly twisted in horror, because he was sure those documents were destroyed. The girl went on to say they had the royal seal, confirming they were legit. They say that in exchange for protecting half the people, the king agrees not to interfere with the fate of the rest. After quoting the lines, the saint furiously threw the documents at His Majesty. He started yelling that it was a conspiracy, and someone had set him up to take the fall. But Emiliona didn't believe him and refused to listen to any excuses, because she saw it all herself. And from that moment, by her authority as a holy maiden, she ordered the deposition of King Vamante. Guards approached Eusebion, ready to take him to a cell, and he started begging for mercy. He was also furious that knights dared to touch royalty and threatened them with death. On top of that, he threatened the saint who turned against him, saying she'd pay for everything. That kind of behavior just proved he was guilty, and now he's gonna rot in a cold prison for the rest of his life. Before long, the king was hauled away, and the hall finally went quiet. Over on a bench, sitting among some of the court witnesses, was a blonde girl. Somehow, the saint knew this was Princess Libera Vamante, and she asked her to come forward. The girl got nervous, not knowing what was wanted of her, but she obeyed the saint's command. The saint had heard that Libera was exiled a few years back to the edge of town because of her common blood. The girl blamed herself for not having the right lineage, but it's not about where you come from, it's about what you do. Besides, rumor has it she tried to save the people and never stopped working hard at her studies. Emiliona had learned all this from the priests and residents of Vamante. Lots of people would have died without that girl, so this country needs someone like her. Emiliona walked up to Libera and put her hands on her shoulders. Then she asked her to become a fair ruler and guide Vamante down the right path. In other words, Libera was about to become queen of the very country she'd been defending. That day, for the first time in history, a woman became the ruler of the kingdom. Emiliona herself crowned the princess, who, despite her background, turned out to be the best candidate for the job, thanks to her brilliant mind. Now that Libera was queen, the saint had to leave, even though she was a little sad. She'd grown a bit attached to the place, but she couldn't stay. She still had things to do. Suddenly, she asked Eloise what she should do when she met with aristocrats from other countries. Seemed like a dumb question to ask the prince, but he just told her to act normal. The girl thought about it. That basically gave her free rein to do whatever she wanted. Suddenly, the carriage they were all riding in lurched hard and came to a stop. They all felt the jolt, but Renevan was mostly worried if the saint was hurt. She was a little shaken up, but overall, she was fine. Prince Alice was okay too, so Emiliona suggested they get out and take a look. Outside, the coachman started apologizing to the saint, but she knew it wasn't his fault. More likely, someone set a magical trap on the road, which meant this was a planned attack. And while they were trying to figure things out, a mysterious figure was watching them from behind a tree. But the crash wasn't the worst thing that happened on the road. An arrow suddenly came flying out of nowhere. She took one in the carriage, but the holy woman's arm got grazed. While Reneban patched her up, Alois called out the attacker, telling him to quit hiding in the bushes and show himself. Emiliona felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, even though the arrow just nicked her. It was probably tainted with monster blood. Then, all three of them heard something moving towards them from deep within the woods. The next minute, they saw a group of people in long robes, their faces hidden under huge hoods. The coachman instantly freaked out, like he knew exactly what kind of creeps they were. Prince Alois figured out right away that they were dark mages, the ones Duke Verone warned him about. They all immediately notched arrows, ready to attack the travelers again. A massive volley of arrows rained down on the holy woman all at once, and it looked like she was done for. But she wasn't going down without a fight, and using her divine power, she conjured a shield, stopping the arrows cold. She was losing it, absolutely furious that someone dared to stand against a representative of God. The guys in robes were just gaping. They didn't think this girl could actually block an attack like that. But Prince Alois? He never doubted his fiancée could handle herself. She might have missed the first shot, but only because it was a total surprise. Then, out of nowhere, dark energy started swirling around Emilion, crushing her from all sides. The saint was struggling to move, and then she started floating up. Someone was clearly using some heavy-duty dark magic. What was happening looked like an attack from anti-divine mages, and they started mocking her, saying the saint, who thought she was God's favorite, got taken down by this. One of those guys prepped for another attack, convinced her power was way overhyped. But Emilion just hissed that they'd made a huge mistake, showing their faces to her. The mage couldn't figure out why she was running her mouth, instead of saying her prayers before she died. The holy woman realized she was drained after using divine punishment, completely tapped out. Finally, Alois decided to help. What the heck was he and Reben even waiting for? Turns out, the prince had prepped an artifact his cousin gave him. Gripping the pendant, Alois morphed it into a divine bow and notched an arrow just like it, which instantly flew towards the villain leader and shattered the dark energy sphere he was holding. At that moment, the dark magic shackles holding the holy woman broke, and she started to fall, even though it wasn't far. But Reben caught her just in time, worried the dark energy might have really messed her up. In the high priest's arms, the holy woman opened her eyes and assured him she was okay. Right now, she was more worried about the fact that the enemies were still here. These creeps were screaming it wasn't over, and that God's dead, and they'd crush the saint's illusions. Breaking free from Reneben's hug, Emiliona told him and the prince to step back. Knowing the high priest would object, she immediately told him not to worry. She really was feeling much better, and repeated that she was way stronger than Reneben thought. Then she turned to that dark mage and decided to argue with him about God. His claim that God didn't exist pissed her off, and she started concentrating energy in her hands, like blue lightning. And then she aimed that ball of energy at the villain who dared attack her and insult God. There was a bright flash, and the villain's magic started to fade. They themselves were having trouble breathing, but their leader just got angrier and ordered everyone to attack the saint again. But seeing that his subordinates were useless, he himself started preparing to destroy the saint. Prince Alois could totally handle the guys whose magic was almost gone. He drew back the string on his magic artifact bow again and let fly an arrow. This time, the attack on the bad guys was way more lethal, and their leader realized there was a seriously powerful artifact involved, something he couldn't take on himself. He ordered the survivors to retreat immediately. He gave Emiliona one last look, and his words about them meeting again sounded like a curse. The next second, the villains vanished without a trace, and Emiliona stared in that direction for a while. She just couldn't figure out who was so desperate to kill her. The prince could see the saint craved the truth, but he couldn't help her with that right now. When Duke Veron came to him, he asked the prince not to say anything to the saint about Renelle for now. And all he did was tell Emilion that someday they would find the villain. Then he asked her to take care of herself, because fighting black mages was super dangerous. At least it's all over, but the saintess was lost in thought again. They were going to be stuck on a ship again, and Emilion felt that seasickness creeping in. She's battling motion sickness again, and it feels like her worst enemy. Even her holy powers can't help her with this, but she's trying to stay strong. Seeing how the prince kept looking after her, Emilion told him to get some rest himself. But the guy didn't feel that tired. Plus, for a bastard like him, death's always around the corner. He's used to staying up all night, watching the perimeter, just to survive. Kinda weird the saintess is only now finding out about his tough childhood, but he just didn't want to show her his weak side. Alois had to work his tail off just to protect himself. And he fought off haters almost as much as Emilion is right now. For a split second, their eyes locked, and a silence fell between them, letting them soak in each other's vibe. But then another wave of nausea hit, and the saint actually felt a little awkward. To distract her, Alois told her they were heading to a place where he could spoil his bride. He also told her not to think anything bad. Just trust him and enjoy the ride. The saint was down, but for some reason, his talk about enjoying things made her uneasy. Soon, they arrived at a spot that the high-ranking nobles really dig. Alois suggested they change clothes since priest robes would totally stand out. He led the saint and the others to a room to chill while they brought the new outfits. This room's way cozier than I thought it'd be. Those chairs are comfy, Reneben. Why don't you chill for a bit while we wait for the prince? Nah, he wasn't having it. Said we don't know this country, he's gotta stick by you? Dude's still jumpy after that attack back in Vermont, obviously. I get his worry, but we all need a break. I told him again to sit down and relax. I said I'd feel guilty if he was working himself ragged. I touched his head and told him to save his strength for when it really matters. The high priest got flustered, like he was about to say something. Then the door behind us swung open, and Alois walked in, holding a box. He'd changed into a uniform, and it's perfect for where we're headed. So, Emilian realized they'd have to play the part of high-ranking aristocrats. She wasn't exactly thrilled about that. And then the prince handed her a box with an outfit inside. She took a good look and couldn't believe Alois wanted her to wear something like that. Later that evening, after resting up, the three of them went outside to take a look around. Passers-by kept turning to stare at them, but nobody said a word. The saint figured she must look pretty damn weird. She'd really gotten stuck with a dress that was basically topless, along with a fur shawl and a white wig. It's pretty obvious she looked more like a hooker, but the prince assured her there was nothing wrong with the outfit. And to get the saint to stop worrying, he leaned in close and told her that no matter what she wore, she'd always be beautiful, especially to him. Emiliona wasn't asking about appearances for that reason. She was worried about showing too much skin. They had now arrived in the port's residential district, but the prince would soon take the saint to a place where she could easily unwind. After passing a couple more blocks, they approached a building with two guards standing at the entrance. The guards immediately got ready to shoo away the uninvited guests, but Alois approached closer, and in a calm, confident voice, he stated that he had come at the invitation of the burning butterfly. The guards exchanged glances. Obviously, that was the password to get inside. And before the prince and the saint, the doors opened, revealing a stone staircase leading down. Descending below, they entered a spacious hall with many doors. Alois asked his companion to put on a mask, since guests must keep their secrets. So that's why she had to go so hard with the disguise, the outfit, and mask, completely hiding who she was. Next, they walked into a hall with a bunch of gaming tables and some smaller couches to chill on. Emiliona started looking around all curious. Everyone here's a high-roller noble, partying day and night, swimming in cash. Pretty quick a croupier came up to the new faces, and even through the masks, he knew they were rookies. The prince shot back that he'd been here a bunch of times with his dad. He also asked for something special to do tonight and wanted to be taken to the Rose Room. Guess that was some kind of password, 'cause the croupier suddenly treated him like a VIP. He immediately started escorting them to that room, and Emiliona kept looking around as they walked. She even thought that if the capital had a gambling hall, it'd probably look exactly like this. They were led to a card table and wished good luck in the game. The saint felt a thrill, admitting she was known as the Queen of Games. Back at the temple, some dude in a dog mask realized they had a new guest, meaning the prince. Then he started messing with him, calling him an idiot just for bringing his girl here. Emiliana snapped back that their relationship was nobody's business, especially not this loudmouth's. Then she found a seat at the table and declared she was there to play. A lady in a rabbit mask thought she was pretty bold, but said they don't usually play with newbies. Besides, she figured the newbie probably only brought a few gold coins to try her luck. Suddenly, Alois slammed some papers on the table, hoping that would cover the bet. Emiliana glanced at the documents and confirmed that they'd do just fine. Then she turned to the dealer, asking him what game he preferred, which kinda threw the other players for a loop. The dealer told Emilione she could pick, and she called for a classic card game, poker. A few guys at the table smirked, figuring this chick was gonna lose it all on the first hand. Then she picked up her cards and immediately got an ace and a two of clubs. She plastered this smug, confident grin on her face. She pushed all her chips into the middle of the table and announced she was betting everything she had. And by everything, I mean the rights to the western part of the EC Kingdom. Some looked at her like she was a complete moron, while others decided to bail on the game rather than watch the train wreck. But the guy in the crowbeak mask was actually into it. He was positive he'd crush the newbie. He didn't care what her family was, but he warned her that if she underestimated him, she wouldn't get off so easy. So, after a while, the third game was underway. Emiliona slammed her cards down again, and it was obvious she'd won, again. The guy in the raven mask seemed to have forgotten about beginner's luck. Or maybe the saint just has a special gift. She was stoked, mentally counting how much she'd already won in such a short time. And she was joking about how the old-timer who'd been bragging was losing, yet again. But then he jumped up in a rage and spat on the chips, saying if the newbie wanted, she could try and take the money. Emiliona slowly started to stand, like she was waiting for this idiot to start the fight. She knocked the chips to the floor and, walking up to him, said she was willing to give him all the money back, but only if he begged her for it on his knees and collected them in that same position in front of her. He needs to make a move before she changes her mind. Figuring nobody would recognize him looking like this, the guy started grabbing chips, not realizing Emiliona was standing right over him. She got a kick out of humiliating one of the nobles. Then she got curious where Alois would take her next, but he told her to pick the game. Just then, some lady came up to them and offered to play. Her face was partly covered by a mask, but you could tell from the wrinkles she was definitely up there in years. Emiliona immediately accepted her invitation, and they headed to another table. After a while, the saint kept winning, over and over, and she was starting to get bored. She couldn't wait for Alois to finally satisfy her, but the prince asked her to hold on a little longer. At the next table, a dealer in a white uniform walked up, which really made her stand out from the other dealers. There was this nobleman hogging the table, winning like 10 times in a row, and nobody wanted to risk their cash anymore. Emiliona noticed the commotion and got curious, wondering what the hell was going on. Looked like a game was starting up, and the dealer was this chick in white, which usually means your odds are crap. But the saintess already plopped her butt down at the table and announced she wanted in. The dealer greeted her, then pointed to some dude who'd bet an olive tree from Nervecchio. Hearing about that tree, Emiliona got a little pensive. That thing symbolizes the goddess Myrtio, plus prosperity and peace for the whole kingdom of Nervecchio. It's a super valuable and rare tree. There are only a few of them in the whole imperial temple. While the saintess was racking her brain trying to figure out how this guy got his hands on it, the dealer asked what the newbie was going to bet. And since the man had bet an olive tree, the girl decided to put up a parola flower. This dude was floored, 'cause rumor has it that flower grew from the tears of the god Pearl. It's super rare even back home, but Emiliona claims she's got the paperwork to prove it's hers. The dealer took the papers the saint offered and confirmed it was a worthy bet. Only Prince Alois had doubts. He didn't think risking that flower was worth it. But Emiliona was sure she wouldn't lose, and she gave the prince a look that made him feel guilty, so he apologized for blurting that out without thinking. The player figured out his opponent was from a powerful family if she was betting that flower, and he didn't think he was dumb enough to lose to some noblewoman. Emiliona stared him down for a few seconds, then broke into a smile, and announced that, actually, yeah, he is that dumb. He actually dared to plant an olive tree. If a saint type found out, he'd be screwed. But right now, while he was still pissed about being insulted by a girl, it was time to mess with the god's symbols. You got the feeling the cultural heritage was on the line, and Emilion was about to get it back. Pulling himself together, the gambling dude told his opponent to pick the game. Then she pulled a fast one, slapping down a box on the table. Where the hell was she hiding that thing? The game was simple. Answer every question truthfully, and the saint was already licking her chops. The box was a magic lie detector. The first one to lie loses. The guy flipped out again, saying she wanted to use some unproven magic trick, and that wasn't fair. But the saint reminded him that he gave her the right to choose the game. Now it looked like he wasn't going to keep his word. All he could do was grit his teeth and agree to play their stupid game. With a sour tone, he told the dealer in white to start already, hoping to get this over with quick. Emiliona decided to grill this guy first. She's definitely got something up her sleeve again. The player asked her a dumb question, like, was she even sure she'd win this ridiculous game? Placing her hand on the box, the saint confidently gave an affirmative answer. Now it was her turn to ask a question, and she remembered they wear masks here to hide their identities. But if she could figure out where the guy across from her was from, she'd basically know who he was. So she demanded to know if he was an aristocrat from the kingdom of Nervecchio. The guy was stunned, didn't know how she guessed it, but he admitted that he was. The next question was even weirder. He wanted to know if the dude next to her was her lover. So the player figured this broad had a rocky marriage. He probably thought he'd try some random attacks, but the saint just said she ain't got no husband. The dealer took that as an answer, and now it was her turn to ask again. The saint knows that in Nervecchio, they give an olive tree every year to whoever watches over the harsh lands of Verdua. She didn't have to rack her brain for long to come up with another question, which implied that her opponent was a noble guard from the house of Verdua. This time, the dude got so pissed he jumped up so fast, he knocked his chair over. And he accused the lady of not knowing the limits in this game, lines you just don't cross. But the dealer stopped him, explaining that aggressive behavior could be considered a loss. Plus, if the bet terms aren't met, he'd have to pay his opponent 5 times the amount. That just made the gamer even angrier. He slammed the document on the table, finally admitting defeat. The guy stormed away from the table, and Prince Alice got curious about how the saintess knew all that. She spotted the stone on his ring. It's only found in Erdua. Plus, the sword masters from Nervecchio have unique calluses, and based on those, he was an easy mark. Just then, the dealer came over and asked if they'd ever been to the Crimson Seed. The prince admitted he had, and realized they were being invited to go there now. Emiliana noticed the ladies whispering about how they were heading to the Crimson Seed after all this, and she was dying to know what that place was like. The Saintess and the prince followed the dealer and reached a door that was locked. The dealer turned the key a few times. Past the door was another stone spiral staircase leading down, and the dealer told them to follow her. She also told them to watch their step, because the lighting down here was super dim. The further down they went, the stronger that nasty smell became to Emilione again. The one she'd been smelling lately, and don't think somebody just ripped one from fear. Alois noticed the saint's worry, and she explained that she was bothered by the smell, which was getting stronger as they went down. When it was pretty damn noticeable, the dealer announced that they had arrived. The woman pointed to a door that the guests themselves had to open and go inside. She herself decided to leave them, which made Emilione even more curious. His Highness grabbed the doorknob, guessing that the source of the smell that the saint could detect was in there. And when he opened the door, they saw a regular room with several beds, and some people lying on them hooked up to IV drips. This place felt like some lab where they keep test subjects patched up. The prince explained that during the war, the nobles needed blood transfusions and were looking for people with matching blood types. And this place was created to trade blood, where it's harvested, and it's called the Crimson Seed.